Honored guests and esteemed colleagues, thank you for joining us at the 2023 Entrepreneurship Exchange, Fueling the World's Entrepreneurs, hosted by Small Business Roundtable and sponsored by Intuit and Gusto. We share a warm welcome for those of you joining us in London, England, and to our streaming viewers tuning in from across the world. Our program will begin in 10 minutes. Please take your seats. Our program will begin in 10 minutes. Thank you. Good morning. The 2023 Entrepreneurship Exchange will begin in 5 minutes. For our guests attending in person, we ask that you silence your mobile devices at this time. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Thank you. Honored guests and esteemed colleagues, welcome to the 2023 Entrepreneurship Exchange, Fueling the World's Entrepreneurs. This event is hosted by Small Business Roundtable, with the generous support of our sponsors, Intuit and Gusto. Now, please welcome to the stage Co-Executive Director, Small Business Roundtable, Rhett Buttle.
Well, hello, everyone. Good morning. As you heard, my name is Rhett Buttle. I'm so proud to serve as Co-Executive Director of the Small Business Roundtable. You'll later hear from my partner in crime, John Stanford. 5 years ago, we started Small Business Roundtable. We could never imagine that we would be standing here today hosting a global conference. First, just let me say, as someone who's done a lot of events, I've never had my team come to me and say, hey, there is a planned train strike on the day of your event. So to look out and to see bodies here is amazing. And I also want to thank so many people from across the globe who are actually streaming in to watch the event today. Before we get started, I just want to thank a number of people who've made today possible. First, I want to thank all of our amazing US-based partners. As you know, the Small Business Roundtable is the largest collection of small business organizations in the United States. Today, we have many of our CEO partners. They could be anywhere in the world doing a number of things, and they've decided to be here in London today talking about these important issues. So I just want to thank them and highlight each of their amazing organizations. Second, I want to thank our UK partners. They've become like family to me. Over the last 6 months, I've been traveling to the UK as we've been preparing for this conference. And the folks at FSB, Enterprise Nation, the Entrepreneurs Network, we've wined and dined together, we've cried, we've bantered together, we've discussed the state of politics. They've really made me feel at home here in the UK, and so we want to thank them for their partnership. We also want to thank our amazing sponsors. Without this wouldn't be possible, so thank you to Gusto, but also thank you to our anchor partner, Intuit. This actually started as a collaboration with Intuit a few years ago. We came up with this great idea. We didn't know that at that time the world would be hit by COVID-19. So our first version of this was actually digital and was a true co-collaboration, and then we envisioned this event together in the UK. So thank you to the Intuit team for everything you've done to make today possible. So with that, I'm so excited to share that we have an amazing day planned. We have an amazing set of speakers from all across the globe. We'll be hearing from folks in the UK government. We'll be hearing from our administration in the States. We have highest representation from folks at the White House, our Department of Commerce. Our brand new undersecretary from the Minority Business Development Agency has made the trip across the pond. So excited about the dialogue and the critical moment it is to talk about transatlantic relations. With that, we'll go ahead and we'll get the panel kicked off, and I'll turn it over to the team. Thank you all so much for being here.
Now, to lead the first plenary, Empowering Transatlantic Trade Through Entrepreneurship, please welcome our moderator, Chief of External Affairs at the Federation of Small Businesses, Craig Beaumont.
It isn't just me.
Our first panelist this morning is the CEO of Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, the chairwoman of the Small Business Roundtable, Karen Kerrigan. Please welcome the director of the UK-US Trade at the UK Department for Small Business and Trade, Graham Floater. Here from the U.S. Embassy, London, is the Minister Counselor and Regional Senior Commercial Officer for the United Kingdom, Rosemary Gallant. And representing the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce is President and CEO, Justin Nelson.
Thank you very much for having us today. Thank you to Rhett and to Leroy and all the organisers, and also for the US delegation who've travelled so far to see us. And thank you for coming. As Londoners, you've managed to brave a second day of train strikes, tube and train strikes. So it's impressive you got here, as well as the people who joined us, obviously, across the pond. Welcome to our first plenary session. So we'll talk for about 25 minutes. We've got a brilliant panel. Thank you, fellow panelists. And we'll keep this moving very quickly. We'll be looking at how transatlantic trade can increase small business opportunities to grow diversify and expand global reach. I'm Craig Beaumont. I'm from the Federation of Small Businesses. We are the UK's grassroots small business organisation with 160,000 members and the voice of the 5.5 million strong small business and self-employed community here. And we are very, very, very excited about the potential for international trade, exports and imports. So we're going to have 30 seconds each, if that's okay by the panel, to introduce themselves. So first of all, Karen.
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Karen Kerrigan, President and CEO of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council. And we're an advocacy, research, and education organization dedicated to promoting entrepreneurship, protecting small business. And for nearly 30 years now, we've worked on a range of policies and private sector initiatives to strengthen the global ecosystem for startup activity and small business growth. And it's great to be here.
I'm Graham Floater. I'm the UK's Chief Negotiator for Trade with the US, and I work at the Department for Business and Trade.
And I'm Rosemary Gallant. I'm the head of the commercial section at the U.S. Embassy, so responsible for trade promotion. We also do advocacy and trade policy work. Thanks.
Justin Nelson with the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce in the United States. We represent the interest of America's 1.4 million LGBT-owned businesses through 54 affiliates in the U.S. We also have 27 affiliates globally representing 40 countries on 5 continents. And our job is to ensure that we have opportunities for LGBT-owned businesses to thrive in the U.S. and around the world. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much. Let's get straight in, and I think we should go to Rosemary and to Graham as well, because you're both embedded in each government's diplomatic and trade structure. So I'm sure you've got lots of free speech you can say without checking back at home. So Rosemary, first of all, where does transatlantic trade currently stand from your country and your government's perspective, and where should it go to?
So briefly, I think the U.S.-UK bilateral trade relationship is extremely healthy. Trade in goods grew 20% last year in 2022. We do not yet have the trade in services, which is a very important figure, but tends to come out, I think, in June. But reached $140 billion in bilateral trade, or 116 billion pounds. And in the UK is our 7th largest trading partner. We've got 1.5 trillion invested in each other's economy, so a very tightly knit economic relationship. And despite that strong base, we're always working to improve that and deepen that relationship. And in fact, our leaders, President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak, met on just earlier this week on March 13th, and they agreed to work to deepen the trade and investment relationship. And we are already collaborating on a number of work streams and dialogues on areas including the SMEs, but also digital trade, on export controls and critical supply chains. So I think we've got a lot of good work going on.
Great. And, Federation of Small Businesses, we are currently in Washington on a visit with my colleagues meeting at the White House and trying to find new things to do there at exactly the same time as Americans come over here and try and do the same. It's brilliant. So let's go to Graham next. What's your point of view from the UK government's perspective?
Well, I have to say, first of all, Rosemary has just set out exactly what our position is on transatlantic trade, so that shows that we're completely aligned. It is a very important trading relationship. The US is our largest single trading partner. And that relationship is now worth over 260 billion pounds every year. As Rosemary said, there is over £1 trillion now invested across the Atlantic in each other's economies. And that represents also over 1 million jobs here in the UK that exist simply because of US investment. Similarly, there are over 1 million US jobs that are there as a result of UK investment. So that really does show how strong that relationship already is. But we also think that it could become stronger. And we mustn't be complacent about that. What can we do? Well, as Rosemary said, the Prime Minister and President met this week in the US, and as part of that visit, they discussed trade, and one of the commitments that came out of that was to look at ways in which we can deepen our trade relationship, and that's something that we will be continuing to do in the coming months and years. And then just on the trade dialogues, and maybe we can pick up on this a little bit later, as Rosemary said, these are a way of the US and the UK coming together, discussing what the current challenges are for trade, not only for ourselves, but also for global trade, because we're part of a global network of supply chains, and how we can go forward together. And we've had some not only very constructive, but really highly intelligent, thought-provoking discussions with stakeholders right across the board, businesses, civil society, as well as our two governments, to think about what the challenges are for this century. And there are a lot. And trade interfaces with much of not only the global economy, but the challenges that we face more broadly. I won't go into all of those now, but just a few. We have, of course, Putin's illegal war. We have the challenge of climate change, and we have also an expanding digital economy, and those are going to be challenges that we're going to need to face in the future.
Thank you. So let's get into the issues. So Rosemary, first of all, I wanted to ask you about inflation. We've seen high inflation in the US, now coming down. We've got high inflation in the UK, coming down a little bit more slowly. What has been the impact of inflation on transatlantic trade?
Well, as you mentioned, both countries definitely, are impacted by the high inflation, particularly in food and energy areas. So, while in nominal terms, energy trade grew by 7%, and this is from the U.S. Stats. So it was global, not just the bilateral, but trade in energy grew by 7%, and in food 10%. But that's in nominal terms, and in real terms, we saw actually a dip in both of those areas. But hopefully, with the coming down, at least on the U.S. side, we'll start to see that tamper down.
Okay, thank you. And then, Graham, you've had a machinery of government change, what's called a MOG, over here. I don't know if Americans would agree with the MOG as a great synonym, but does that create opportunities now for transatlantic trade? Now you've brought business and trade together in one place?
Yes, I think it does. I think we've always worked very closely together across departments. The old Department for International Trade and the old Department for Business, known as BAYS, have always had colleagues who work extremely closely together. What the MOG change has done, as you rightly say, machinery of government, means that we now have a department, the Department for Business and Trade, that brings these two elements together, and I think that can only make it stronger. So I do think that there are real opportunities to marry up, on the one hand, the domestic policy that we have here in the UK for business, and how that then is transformed through our international trade. And so I think over the coming months, we'll see more and more of that integration and more of the opportunities coming from that.
Great, thank you. And we've got the UK's Minister for Small Business coming, who is now technically a Minister for Business and Trade, which I think is a really good, development. So, Karen, just to bring you in now, from a kind of competition perspective, the hot topic has been about trade in the US, hotly debated, looking at things like the USMCA, the Mexican agreement, and trade restrictions. So, how has that impacted your members and small businesses as they try and reach global markets?
Well, the issue of trade has always been a hot topic ever since I've been at SPE Council for nearly 28 years now, all the way from NAFTA and many of the other trade agreements, and giving trade promotion authority to the president, and of course the TPP, which never happened, with President Obama, which we strongly supported as an organization, and then of course USMCA. So for small businesses in general, one of the big arguments and one of the facts that we always bring to the front part of this debate is that it is small to mid-sized businesses that dominate trade in the United States. So, 90% of businesses who export happen to have 100 employees or less, 80% happen to have 50 employees or less. So small businesses, dominate this sector. And so with USMCA, it passed, and then it was implemented in July of 2020, which, obviously a pandemic was going on. But I think USMCA is going to build off a lot of the success we have with NAFTA, which again, small businesses trading with Mexico and China, Mexico and Canada pretty much dominated trade, and with USMCA, the modernization, strengthening IP rights, reducing red tape and costs at the border, allowing smaller shipments to go through without duties or taxes. And also a big piece of that is a small business chapter, which very educational in nature in terms of educating small businesses how to trade, but also giving them a permanent voice to identify any emerging barriers. So it's all been good, from a small business perspective. On the other hand, there's been tariffs, Section 301, Section 232 that have been implemented over the last 4 years, and the US ITC just put out a report that found those 171 billion in new tariffs have had a negative impact, on businesses in terms of imports and inputs. So we see when you open markets, it has a positive impact on business, and when you erect barriers, tariffs, it has a negative impact on their costs.
I think we've learned quite a lot from that deal, because FSB has pushed for a small business chapter in each trade agreement that the UK now signs as we develop our trade expertise. So New Zealand, Australia, and even within the EU TCA has been reflected, which I think we're learning from that experience. I did notice that your council's expressed quite serious concern about exports falling now for 3 months in a row and imports for 6 months in a row. Right. Is that a blip? And if it's not a blip, how can we turn it around?
Well, we hope it's a blip. And the good news is my chief economist just posted some new numbers. So January is starting out strong. We're up by 3%. So those have just been posted on the website, specouncil.org, over the past couple of days. So we're hopefully in a growth mode, and we're less in a volatile mode. I think that really depends on economic stability and economic healing across the globe, right? And healing in the U.S. and if we're going to have growth moving forward, and if we just continue to expand markets and collaborate across borders, and our president has some luck in terms of some trade agreements and skill that he's working on, and obviously with the UK. So I feel very positive that those numbers will turn around, but there's obviously some geopolitical tensions and things going on in the world that may impact those numbers. But I think moving forward, it should be strong. I think particularly given digital platforms and the ability of businesses, I think, to use those platforms to trade. So, but a lot depends on growth, economic stability, where the economy is going. And I think once we see growth, consistent growth, then we're going to see consistent growth in the trade numbers as well.
Great, thank you. I think we're picking up here that a lot of attention should be drawn to how do you diversify the small business community, how do you get groups traditionally underrepresented involved in trade. So Justin, can I bring you in now and ask, from your perspective, you're the voice of LGBT plus business in the US, the national voice in the US. So what do you see as the opportunities in transatlantic trade?
Well, I think it really comes down to an education gap, and that's not just among LGBT. I think it's among diverse and historically marginalized communities at large. We're seeing some uptick in that. I think the important thing here is two-way education, right? And for far too long, leaders in government and in our agencies really looked at us as just LGBT people, like that's it, that's all we do all day is be LGBT, which we do, but we also run businesses, we own businesses.
Except on Sundays, I don't know.
Right, I mean, we're concerned about the same sorts of things. I mean, the estimated 1.4 million businesses in the US have a combined economic impact on our economy of $1.7 trillion. And to give folks perspective, that would make us the 10th largest economy in the world, just LGBT business owners. So when you talk about trade, why would you not want to be doing trade with the 10th largest economy in the world? And so I think educating on both sides of this, it is a huge undertaking. We started this, actually, I see Karen Mills right here in the front row. When Karen was head of the SBA is really when the government started working with us and taking note of LGBT businesses, starting to think about what we could do in terms of trade, how could we be educating our population to be looking at markets outside of the US. So I think there's a huge opportunity here, and one thing I failed to mention in my brief intro is two of our global partners are here. Out Britain is in the audience, and our friends from the Canadian LGBT Chamber are here, who are actually conducting an LGBT trade mission right here. So I think it's look no further than the opportunities that are in front of us, but we have to continue to educate, and I hope we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about what we're doing with some of our government agencies that are helping us do just that.
So one question I had to think, actually thinking about trade missions, do you think there's a case for more dedicated, tailored, specific export help for the LGBT community, other communities as well, on both sides of the Atlantic? Should there be more of these dedicated trade missions, for example?
I think so. I mean, people want to do business with people that, know their background, that have shared responses, shared interactions. I also think, there's this misnomer that LGBT businesses can be easily put into one or two categories. I mean, we have everything from manufacturing to aerospace, to the corner florist. So the idea that if you're not, if we're looking at the LGBT community, the kinds of products and services that can be exported or that can create a trade relationship are finite is completely incorrect. So I think continuing to have those conversations is incredibly important. We signed an MOU recently with the International Trade Administration to do just that, to do this education on both sides of the equation, so to speak, so that our businesses are aware of what opportunities are out there, what sort of support. Rosemary works with a wonderful group of professionals in commercial services. One of the best kept secrets, if you're a U.S. business, is Gold Key service. I mean, this is absolutely amazing. It's U.S. taxpayer funded, and it helps you find your end users, your distributors, your trade partners, and then sets up meetings for you in those countries. They'll go and look to see what region or what area of the world your particular good or service might be most successful in looking at exporting. So I think those are really exciting things. And then also we have friends in the audience from the Export-Import Bank of the United States, which is incredibly important because they'll guarantee your exports with particular importers, end users, and distributors. So there's a plethora of opportunity there. It's just about doing the right kind of education and tailoring the conversation to each individual constituency.
Great, thank you. So time's galloping away, so I'm going to ask for some very short answers from the panel from now. So we've got 250 people registered for the event. We've got people watching online. So for you, Graham, where should a small business looking to export go to, thinking about the government's resources and online presence?
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, go to the government website. I mean, there's a lot of information there. I wanted to mention perhaps three things if we need to be brief. I mean, the first is the British Business Bank, which is supporting over £12 billion of finance to over 96,000 SMEs. That is real finance that is helping real businesses, and something to be aware of if you're not already. We've got a network of 38 growth hubs across England, and they provide access to information and advice to SMEs alongside our free business support helpline. That is very much tailored to particular regions, so you can find the information that's relevant to you in your particular area. And then more broadly, we've got the Exports Support Service that supports UK SMEs through access to in-market resources, including sector reports. We've got one-to-one advice and guidance, and we've also got specialist third-party providers as well providing support. So there's plenty there. So I'd encourage anyone who has not already started using those resources, please go ahead and use them. They're for you.
And you can find them now on one website for the very first time called Help to Grow, which has brought together the business department stuff and the trade department stuff all in one place. So if you're looking to export, get help at all, that's the place to go. Rosemary, the same question for you. If you have a US small business owner watching, where should they go?
Well, thankfully, Justin has already done the advertisement for our, we have a great network of 106 export assistance centers across the United States that provide similar services to what Graham described on the British side of counseling, of market information. Also provide help companies digitize their company and provide a website service that's really useful. As Karen mentioned, some 85% of exporters are small, medium-sized companies. So we assisted 32,000 companies last year in exporting. And these export assistance centers are also a good place to be introduced to programs such as the Small Business Administrations or the Ex-Im Bank's financing. So, and as Graham mentioned for the UK side, on our side, it's very hard to remember, a website called trade.gov. And also resources there for international companies looking at the US market, as well as US companies looking to go international.
Brilliant, thank you. And then if you think about you two obviously are embedded in the government, and now Karen and Justin and myself, we are advocates outside. We always think about politics and the future and who might be in government next. So we're doing a lot of work, so is Emma from Enterprise Nation, as to how we engage with a potential new government here. Could be as soon as October 2024. So do you work kind of across the aisle in a similar way in the US? Are you building a cross-party agenda on trade?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and it has been that way on all trade agreements and also on giving the president trade promotion authority, which is the fast track authority. He has the ability to, or she, to negotiate trade agreements, and then Congress votes up or down. So as an organization, we have supported that across administration, from Clinton to Obama to Republicans, and we want President Biden to have that too. It's expired, so we're pushing him, and hopefully it will be something that he'll embrace, and the Congress will give him TPA. But also, the facts speak for themselves on this. When it comes to trade, it really does bring out strange bedfellows. There are organizations, there are Republicans and Democrats who are protectionists, and there's Republicans and Democrats who are for global market access. So we just sort of speak to the facts, and across every industry, in every area of the country, every congressional district, every state, there are lots and lots of businesses who trade, depend on trade. The local economic impact is extraordinary in terms of job creation, and that tends to, whenever on this issue, bring out significant bipartisan majorities for on the trade front. So yes, we think that's critical, and luckily all the facts and the businesses and the workers who benefit are engaged, and they really help us push this over the finish line, things that we're working on. So
there's a phrase in one of my favorite US shows, which is facts are facts, America.
Yes.
And I think that has come through just then. Justin, have you got anything to add to that?
Well, it gets harder and harder to be nonpartisan when it comes to cultural issues in the LGBT community. You win and then you get kicked in the gut and get kicked 6 steps back. When it comes to policy issues, and trade being one of them, you really do have to be nonpartisan on it and look at the big picture and what is going to be best for our businesses. So, it is a constant battle depending on who's in the majority on certain issues. But when it comes to business issues, which quite frankly is 90% of what we focus on, you may be surprised. The LGBT issues are incredibly important, and we're there. But we really are looking at what's going to help our businesses continue to be that 10th largest economy in the world. So bipartisanship is important in that regard. And I'll save my other comments for another panel at another event.
Thank you. Right, final question, because we're now finishing. So a kind of quick fire, really, from everyone on the panel. And I know some of you may be able to speak more than others, but everyone's talking about a UK-US trade deal now. After Windsor Agreement, after progress in Northern Ireland, it's been kind of held back. But now there seems to be a slight warming. But I would like to ask each panelist, can you give me a score, an odds, maybe a mark out of 10 for what you think is the likelihood of a UK-US trade deal? And if you can't say that, say something else. Let's start with Justin, and we'll move back this way.
I think there's probably what we want and what the reality is right now. I would probably say maybe a 6.
6. Great, thank you. Rosemary?
I don't think I'll put a number on it. I say the administration hasn't ruled out an FTA, but continues to work on these other streams, such as the SME effort.
And the alternatives are important. So there's the UK-US SME dialogue, and there's also perhaps state-level
There are
activities.
state-level efforts, and there's also, doing a lot already with the Department for Business and Trade. We just finished a 2-week roadshow that Department for Business and Trade organized, so we're out there beating the bushes trying to get more companies trading with the framework that we have now.
Great, thank you. Graham, do you have odds? And if not, if you've got an alternative you'd like to say?
I'm not a betting man, but I would say that we've delivered a number of really important trade deals over the last couple of years. We now have beef going over to the US. We have lamb going over to the US for the first time in 20 years because it was banned due to the BSE crisis. Those are due to a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiating and in front as well. And they've been successful. We were successful with reducing the tariffs, eliminating the tariffs on UK steel and aluminium going to the US last year. That was a really big resolution, and suspending the tariffs, the additional tariffs on a whole range of US products. So we are doing a lot already. So I think the debate about what kind of mechanism a trade deal takes is probably a bit of a red herring. What we should be doing is concentrating on what we can do together to free trade. We have been doing that, and I think I feel that there's a good, strong relationship. The PM President meeting on Monday showed that, and you can see the public statement that made that commitment to deepening trade. So I'm optimistic. Yeah.
This is very possibly a slightly politician answer, which is brilliant. And then finally, Karen, what's your, do you give any odds? What's your feeling about trade deal?
I think eventually we'll get there. I don't know if it's in the next 2 years or 3 years, but I give it a very high chance. I would say 75, 80% that there'll be a trade deal. Now, it may take some time. I just think there's a lot of geopolitical pressure is going to compel the U.S. to do this. And you do have a lot of pressure bubbling up from the Congress, you know, in terms of cutting these trade deals, leading on trade again, and I think that will eventually also affect the US-UK trade deal.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And I think I'm going to join Justin with a 6 out of 10. It's moved from a 5 to a 6. It's beginning to warm. I agree with Karen, it could well happen, but the other panelists are right that there are other things to focus on too. So thank you, everyone. Thank you all very much for listening to us, either in person or in the live broadcast. Thank you to the organisers, Small Business Roundtable, bring us all together, and thank you for the panellists. So I'd like you just to express your appreciation the traditional way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here to introduce our next conversation on leveraging data to scale small business economy is proud board member of the National Association of Women Business Owners, Megan Patton.
Hi, it's so wonderful to be here in London. Grateful for this opportunity. I'd like to welcome back to stage, we already met him once this morning, but I'd love to welcome back Rhett Buttle. He's the co-executive director of our Small Business Roundtable. He is an entrepreneur, an advocate, and one of the most trusted leaders in the intersection of business and policy in Washington, D.C. Most recently, Rhett served as National Business Advisor to President Joe Biden's 2020 campaign. He has worked for President Barack Obama, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Welcome, Rhett. Next up, I would like to introduce to you the Arnold C. Harberger Professor of Economics from the University of Chicago, Professor Ufuk Akçit. He is an elected research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, Center for Economic Policy Research, and the Center for Economic Studies. He is also a distinguished research fellow at Coase University. He received a BA in economics at Coase University 2023 and a PhD in economics at Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 2009. Welcome, Professor. I would also like to introduce Michael Negron. He is a Chicago alderperson from the 47th Ward in Chicago, Illinois. He is a lifelong Chicagoan with 15 years of experience in public service. He served in the Navy after college and worked for both President Obama and Elizabeth Warren in Washington during the depths of the financial crisis. In 2011, Michael returned to Chicago to be a policy advisor to Mayor Emanuel, where he helped raise the minimum wage, create a free community college program for Chicago public school students with a B average, and establish a legal defense fund for undocumented residents. Michael was raised in a union immigrant household and graduated from Harvard Law School. Welcome, Michael Negron.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Megan. And it's such a pleasure to share the stage with these two amazing gentlemen. I know we've done a lot of intros, so I just wanted to hop right in. Professor, I wanted to start with you. I know a lot of your work has been really focused on business dynamism. What are you seeing sort of in the macro trends from your perspective?
Sure. So first of all, I'm interested in how economies perform in general from a macroeconomic perspective. But in order to understand how macroeconomies perform, you need to understand how, at the micro level, how firms are performing or how entrepreneurs are performing. So that's why when you go to the micro level, you see quite a bit of trends, especially since 1980. US is the poster child for these trends. So business dynamism has been declining in various measures. For instance, when you look at the market concentration, the share of the largest firms in the US economy, it's been trending upwards consistently. When you look at the markups, the price over marginal cost, how much firms are charging over their marginal cost for market leaders, that's been trending upwards. New business formation, the entry rate, number of new businesses relative to incumbent businesses has gone down from 14% down to 7%, a massive decline. When you look at the young business economic activity share, meaning what fraction of the employment is being hired or employed by small businesses, and when I say small, I really talk about the smallest of the small businesses, that's been declining from 18% down to 8%. So in many, many dimensions, we see this decline over several decades. And this is worrying because we need fresh blood in an economy. The economic theory for many, many years has been putting this forth, which is economic growth is a result of creative destruction. Since Schumpeter, we know this term, and this creative destruction is young businesses, new entrepreneurs introducing better technologies and products and replace incumbents. And we need this turnover in the economy, and the turnover rate has been declining. When you look at the probability of market leaders remaining as market leaders has been increasing over time. So all these things are worrying, but especially for small businesses, but what's even more worrying is the COVID shock. Whenever there's a macroeconomic shock, the first group of firms that are being affected by this are the small businesses. And that's why during COVID, especially for small businesses, the employment activity has declined dramatically. This is all alarming, of course, especially for an economy like the US economy, and some of these trends were also true for the UK. After COVID, we saw some recovery for small businesses, and indeed many people discovered that they can run their own business from their homes, and there was a significant recovery afterwards. Indeed, it went up above the pre-COVID levels. Now, over the past 12 months, we see again a decline in small businesses. So that's why this up and down is important for policymakers to realize and act upon.
Sarah. Well, everyone here who's known me knows I'm a huge political dork, and so my favorite moment of this last State of the Union that we heard from President Biden was when he talked about the 10 million small businesses that were started over the last few years. And so, Michael, I just wanted to turn to you to hear a little bit about how the administration is thinking about those new businesses, how you all are thinking about using data. You've been in the administration, you started on the transition team, you've been at the sort of forefront of helping to build back the structure for small business. What does that look like, and how are you guys leveraging data to sort of put the right policy perspective in place?
Thank you, Red. Good morning, everybody. I think the way that we have looked and leveraged data, unsurprisingly, is to help target policy interventions. The president is personally very excited about the opportunity to talk about small business growth. It's something that we have been harping on for more than a year since that first set of new business formation statistics started to show that trend in applications. But over the course of the last 2 years, there are a few trends that we have focused on. It guided some of our out-of-the-door interventions on PPP and other issues, and some of those issues are informing our work going forward. And so just a couple trends that we observed coming in that really haven't changed, right? So number one is when you look at minority and women-owned businesses, they have been less likely to have established banking relationships. It's something that when we came into office, we heard a lot about on the transition in the early round, the very first round of the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, which was this, from our UK friends, was our big signature emergency program. It was forgivable loans that was primarily channeled through banks, which is how the SBA generally, the Small Business Administration generally gets capital to businesses is through guaranteed loans through banks. And so the Paycheck Protection Program, the primary delivery point was banks, which for categories of businesses that don't really have those relationships, that made it a imperfect tool. And so that was an issue. The Federal Reserve surveys have also shown that minority businesses are likelier to go to online banks, and so non-bank entities or community development financial institutions, which are mission-focused lenders. That's another entry point that in the early round of PPP were not featured prominently. And another trend that we worked on together is for women and minority-owned businesses, they're much likelier to be micro businesses, likelier to be sole proprietors, likelier to be non-employer businesses. And so in the early rounds of PPP, the formula for that class of business, because in the US, these businesses often file their taxes on their personal form through like a Schedule C form on their 1040. So they had a different formula, much less generous. And so when we came in, that was something that we'd heard about quite a bit. I heard about it in Illinois when I was at the Commerce Department, that it was a barrier. And so we came in with a very targeted sense of changes that we wanted to make. And I'm using this as setup going forward, so I'm not just telling stories about PPP, but we changed the formula to make it more generous. We had a holiday, essentially, where we only accepted for a few weeks applications from really small businesses, under 20 employees. We tried to expand channels, brought in more CDFIs into the PPP process. And we saw some good results. There was a GAO study. There were other, the Government Accountability Office, which is a watchdog agency in the US. They did a report. We had some academics also did a report showing that the 2021 round of the Paycheck Protection Program had deeper levels of penetration in low and moderate income communities and in minority communities. And so those sets of lessons really have informed our work going forward, and how we're trying to focus the new initiatives that we're developing. And so we have a number of things underway to try to leverage those lessons. One is a real focus on technical assistance. So we've made some historic investments in those types of, a lot of you all are here today. Those organizations that are dedicated to providing businesses with that kind of end-to-end support. So in the American Rescue Plan, which was our signature emergency relief legislation passed in the early days of the administration, we created a new program called Community Navigators. That was a $100 million program. We also had a significant investment through Treasury, $500 million in technical assistance, and really trying to meet businesses where they are, provide them the help they need to access our programs. And so that's a major effort. Another is transforming how businesses access capital, and so the SBA is in the process. They posted some proposed rules earlier, I think late last year, that would open up pathways to additional non-banks to participate in its traditional programs, whether it's private non-banks or making permanent a program we call Community Advantage, which is a pathway for CDFIs to deliver 7A loans. And so there's couple rules that would do that would make it easier for banks to give small loans. There's data that shows that I'd mentioned those micro businesses, they don't need $5 million, they often need 50,000, 80,000, 100,000. And so making sure that we're making it easier for banks who want to do those types of loans, which are just frankly less profitable for banks. And so to make it easier, reduce the paperwork they have to fill out, just make it easier for them to participate in the program, that's another feature. And so that's an attempt to meet people where they are, knowing that they're not necessarily, a lot of these small businesses are not going to traditional banks, or they're going online, they need less amounts of money, and so how do we make sure that that's available to these businesses? That's another major channel of focus. And the last thing I'd mention is another American Rescue Plan program that's just starting to really get implemented is the Treasury State Small Business Credit Initiative. It's $10 billion. It's funding for every state, territories, tribes to establish their own capital access programs, loans, equity, right? So it's not just lending programs, but also equity investment, which is a major barrier. And so there's programs that all across the country are starting to get stood up that will really make access to capital much more equitable in years to come. And so that's another major focus. And at the state level, they are looking at a lot of those same types of issues. How do we help the really small businesses? How do we make sure that there's more flexible working capital available? How do we make sure there's more equity capital available? So that these types of discussions are playing out in microcosm as states put their plans together and get them implemented.
Super helpful to have that perspective, and I think for a lot of us in the audience, we're either policymakers or advocates, we have our head down. Professor, I feel like you're in this privileged position where you kind of get to sit back, and I had the pleasure of having lunch with you yesterday and hear about your global travels. I mean, what are you observing sort of globally about the way governments are responding to small business in this moment?
These trends that I highlighted is happening in many countries. So I see a little bit of a confusion on the policymaker side in general, in the following sense. So looking at the aggregate numbers could be misleading. For instance, typically policymakers are trying to increase the R&D to GDP ratio, and then they are being happy when they reach a certain target level. But we need to also be mindful about the different incentives of different firms in the economy. So for instance, if I'm a dominant market leader, I can make money. So if I'm a small firm, there's only one way for me to make money. I have to do something really radical, and I need to prove myself to the market. But if I'm the dominant market leader, in that case, I can make money in two ways. First, again, I can do something radical, but two, if I can defend the market and don't get replaced in the market, again, I can still survive and make money. So that's why the incentives of firms are shifting dramatically once they become the dominant market leader. And we see this in many different studies. So I've conducted lots of studies on this. For instance, a paper that we are going to release this week with a colleague from Census Bureau in the US, we look at inventors who are changing jobs. And so you look at the same inventor who moves to a large incumbent versus who moves to a small firm. When they move to a large incumbent, the compensation, the salary of the inventor just skyrockets. Well, you might say because he or she is becoming more productive in a large incumbent, so that's why they are being compensated more. It's the complete opposite. When they move to a large incumbent, their innovativeness goes down dramatically. So that's one fact. Another fact that I would like this time, I've done studies in many different countries. This time we looked at the Italian economy. And we used the social security data, so every worker in Italy. We merged this with the balance sheet data in Italy, plus with the registry of local politicians, 500,000 local politicians, mayor, vice mayor, council members, etc. Since it's a part-time job, they can also work for a company at the same time, so they can be on a payroll of a company. So what you see is very interesting, actually. So we call this the leadership paradox. We ranked the largest 20 firms in every market. Year, sector, region is the definition of the market, and we looked at the largest 20 firms. As the firm is becoming the dominant market leader, innovativeness is just going down, but the number of politicians that they are hiring relative to their size is increasing, okay? So this is all telling us, economic theory, once you start reasoning through the lens of economic theory, that already tells you that there's so-called Arrow's replacement effect. I don't want to do something radical. Now, why is it relevant for policymaking? It means that if you just go and subsidize bluntly firms, of course, they are going to use this money for different purposes. Yes, R&D numbers might go up, but most of them might go towards patent tickets to protect themselves and to build a wall around themselves. And when we look at the firm's life cycle, when they are young, when they are small, the quality of the patents that they are producing is much more radical than the patents that they produce down the road. Okay, so that's why, not every subsidy is generating the same return. So that's why it's really important to do impact analysis. It's extremely important to keep an eye on small businesses because they are like small children in the family. They are very fragile, but they're also our future. And as a result, maybe things might look good by having, the market concentration going up, etc. But this is going to be harmful for tomorrow because this is going to discourage also young businesses today and, people who are graduating from school, rather than starting their own business, they are trying to look for high-paying managerial position in large incumbents. So we have to be mindful. We have to read the data. That's why we have to have very detailed data on small businesses and how they are performing because as I mentioned, just over COVID, they showed a massive fluctuations because, of course, now we are in the interest rate hike regime in that period, and the financing gets harder and harder. So as a result, their business activities are getting really hurt by the current situation. So that's why it's not a surprise that both in the UK and in the US, small business activities have been declining exactly over the past 12 months, which is exactly also when the interest rate hike started.
Yeah, super helpful. Michael, you've given us a great perspective for how the American government is thinking about recovery. The president talks a lot about sort of moving American goods out of American borders. How's the administration thinking about that from your perspective?
Well, I think something that has been a major focus for the president and I think is a departure from our predecessors, although I think our immediate predecessor talked about it, and that is industrial policy. And the emphasis for this president has been to be more intentional about the industries that we are looking to develop strength in, not only for the purposes of job creation and for the purposes of having a strong competitive presence with respect to China and other parts of the world, but our experience through the pandemic, and I know this was mirrored here, is that a lot of those, whether it was just the building blocks for a COVID test, to other face mask, making face masks, things like that, those supply chains were not home. They were all over the world, and in many cases in parts of the world where our relationships are not the strongest. And so these were all important reminders of the need to have that kind of resiliency, and so supply chain resiliency was sort of helped give birth to a real intensive focus on industrial policy, and having the ability to export is a big part of it. Develop those strengths so that we can ultimately have enough of a foundation for the small businesses that support those domestic supply chains, then also participate globally. And just to bring it back to data, that's an important part of it. Just at the business perspective, is it's hard to market your product or to pick where to focus without understanding if a business wants to market to the UK, well, what does it look like here? What's the pricing? Who are the competitors? What are the strengths that we bring? What are the weaknesses? I mean, you need that kind of information just to develop a business plan. And so the power of this convening and a lot of the voices in this room is that you are directly positioned to provide that information to the businesses looking to do business here in the UK or in the US. The businesses just need that information. And so our job as policymakers to support you is to understand where data is lacking, and then we have the ability, not immediate of course, but to prioritize developing those sorts of data to then help support the work that everybody in this room is doing to get that to businesses so that they can then go and make money.
Super helpful. We have about 4 minutes left. Professor, I wanted to give you the opportunity. I know you launched a new project with Intuit that is focused on providing us with some of this critical data. I want to hear about that. And then, Michael, I'm going to ask you to wrap us up with some advice for the audience and the folks who are streaming. So, Professor, tell us about the new exciting research with Intuit, and then let's leave our folks with some wisdom.
Sure. So if you haven't realized yet, I'm a big fan of young and small businesses. But the problem is they are not represented well in the standard data sets. They are typically left in the shadow. And typical large-scale data sets are covering firms that have more than 10 workers typically, so they are truncated from the bottom. Or if you look at the surveys, for instance, that tries to keep track of the economy, typically they are undersampling small businesses. Even those small businesses that have at most 10 workers are 80% of the firms. And when you look at the entrant firms, 93% of them have at most 10 workers. So that's why it's very, very challenging to observe small businesses in any data set, but not in real time either, right? So that's why we partnered, my research team partnered with Intuit QuickBooks, and we devised a new index, very exciting new index. It's called Intuit QuickBooks Small Business Index. It's going to be released on the first day of every month for the UK, US, and Canada. And we are going to look at the employment dynamics of these group of firms in real time. So we are going to know in the beginning of every month how small businesses are performing at the end of the previous month, basically, by the end of the previous month. And that way, policymakers, researchers, journalists will be able to observe small businesses and potentially see, for instance, if a macroeconomic shock or if a policy intervention works or doesn't work. So that way, it will be possible to observe how they are responding to any changes in the economy.
Wonderful. And wrapping it up with our last minute, Michael, what would you leave us with words of wisdom for this esteemed group, both watching at home and the amazing group of folks we've assembled today?
I think it's important to have convenings like this, to talk to each other. Just over the course of the last couple years, as we've responded to crises and things like that, having strong voices out in the communities, in our states and cities, who are working with businesses every day and telling us what you're seeing, telling us what the businesses are telling you. When you're making policy in the nation's capital and other places, you don't have that. It can become a bubble, right? You don't often have that exposure, and so it's important to have everybody in this room not hesitating to talk to us, tell us what you're hearing, talk to each other. Tell us the story of what you're seeing, because we can't make effective policy and respond to what's happening on the ground without hearing from you, and so that's why this is such an important gathering, and I know we've appreciated our partnership with Rhett and others in this room as we've dealt with the ups and downs of the last 2 years.
Wonderful. Please join me in thanking Michael and the professor.
Our programming continues with a plenary addressing how entrepreneurship can create wealth for all communities. Here to lead the discussion is our moderator, Director of Lloyds Bank, Claudine Reed. Our first distinguished panelist is the President and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc., Ron Busby. Representing the New York's Federal Reserve is Assistant Vice President and Director of Community Development Analysis, Claire Kramer Mills. And lastly, we welcome the founder and CEO of MSD UK, Mayank Shah.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Glad to see you all here. Thank you again to the Small Business Roundtable. My name is Claudine Reed, and in this segment, we're going to be discussing how entrepreneurship can create wealth for communities. I have an incredible panel here, and I'm going to ask you if you could just do a 15-second introduction. We'll start off with Ron.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ron Busby. I'm the president, CEO, and the founder of the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc., headquartered in Washington, D.C., with 152 Black Chambers located in 42 states, plus 6 on the continent of Africa. Thank you very much. Look forward to the conversation.
Good morning, everyone. Claire Kramer Mills from the New York Fed. I direct our community research and insights, and I helped launch the New York Fed's and the Federal Reserve System's Small Business Credit Survey.
Hi, good morning. I'm Mayank Shah. I'm the founder and CEO of Minority Supplier Development UK. We are a not-for-profit organization that supports and encourage corporations to be more diverse in their supply chain and connect them with ethnic minority businesses from across the UK.
Awesome, thank you so much. All right, we're going to get started, and I'm going to try and give you a bit of context. And my first question will be same question to all of the panel members. Can each of you describe an inequality that underserved small business owners face across race, gender, and any other issues around geography in the US and the UK? To Ron, to Claire, and then to Mike.
Thank you. Most of us know that we just came out of a very difficult time across the globe, particularly in America, for Black-owned businesses during COVID. We also witnessed the murder of George Floyd, and what we saw during that period of time is that Black businesses really faced many challenges that many other business owners and communities did not see. We closed 41% of our businesses, which represents 442,000 Black firms closed between the months of February of 2020 and March of that year. So the challenges that were faced upon Black businesses had a lot to do with some of the challenges systemically that America has faced. And so the U.S. Black Chamber has been in front of many of the conversations, particularly is how do we reopen those firms? How do we make sure that those firms have the resources, the acumen, and the relationships that they need to continue to create the wealth that Black communities and Black business owners need to continue to move our agendas forward?
Thank you, Ron. Same question to Claire.
Sure, and I'll begin my comments with a disclaimer. The views I express are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York or the Federal Reserve System. With that said, I'd like to just address a big disparity, which is asset ownership. And in the United States, for example, households that are headed by Black or Latino heads have significantly fewer asset holdings than those helmed by whites. Also, women, the disparity, we often hear the wage disparity between men and women, but in terms of asset ownership, households headed by women hold 55 cents to $1 of wealth owned by a household helmed by men. That has a huge bearing on financial relationships because very often when you're a business owner and you go to seek capital for your business, you're asked to pledge a personal guarantee, to pledge often a home, and that can be a huge barrier to access to financing for the firm and growth capital for the firm.
Thank you, Claire. Maya?
I think recent census figures in the UK comes out with 20% of population being non-white, but at the same time, the disparity of income between the whites and non-white is huge. We did a major study on minority businesses in the UK. One of the biggest issues we have is that there's no data capture, but we did used AI techniques to assess the contribution of minority businesses. And the research comes out with finding out that 1 in 6 businesses in the UK are minority. They employ 10% of the UK's workforce, 3 million people. But at the same time, if you look at the income disparity, it still exists. So the research clearly discusses about the key areas or key issues that minority businesses face. Discrimination, but also the biggest thing is access to networks, access to finance, and we have discussed about the whole issue around access to finance, which is going on, and we still haven't. If we think about 1% of overall investment goes to Black businesses, less than 1%. That's a big issue.
Really big issue. All right, so Claire, the New York Federation has done a significant amount of research on small businesses. What have you found in terms of the revenue, access to capital, and growth across gender and race in particular?
Thanks for the question. The Fed launched the Small Business Credit Survey following the financial crisis, and this is an annual pulse that we take. It's a national survey that really digs deep into the financing and credit experiences of small businesses. It's probably one of the most detailed looks that we have. And a couple of things I think are worth noting. the $1 million revenue threshold is a really big mark for small businesses in general. We refer to that casually as, have you scaled your business? And we know that there are disparities in the ability to scale. We're still not seeing large percentages of Black, Hispanic-owned or women-owned businesses reaching that mark. But I would go back to the earlier comments related to disparities in credit access and differences in asset holdings as sort of headwinds for those groups. In terms of financial relationships, there's a lot of potential. I would say, I think that's the positive way to put it, but big differences in banking relationships. So we looked in entering the pandemic about, basically more than half of white-owned businesses had an existing borrowing relationship with a bank. Those numbers were less than a third of among Hispanic and Black-owned businesses. And so that had a huge bearing on the ability to weather the storm, the uncertainties of the pandemic, supply chain disruptions, now interest rate uncertainties. And so I would point to the fact that we have controlled for credit risk, and there are still disparities for women, Hispanic, and Black-owned businesses. Even if you look at low credit risk firms, their abilities to receive all of the financing that they're seeking are still lagging. And so those are, I think, things that we can really, we can do better.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So I'm going to pose this question to Mayak first. I know that MSD UK have done a significant amount of research. So what role does entrepreneurship have in actually reducing inequality? And what are the benefits of reducing inequality through entrepreneurship?
I think I always say that if you're looking at entrepreneurs and you're supporting entrepreneurs, you are supporting a community because the research after research has shown that minority entrepreneurs tend to employ people from their own communities. And if we have, and compare with the programs in the US and the mandates and public law that mandates doing business with minority businesses, I have seen the impact it has on, and I have seen so many minority businesses working from a garage now become billion-dollar businesses, giving employment to that community. And I think that is important. Because we talk about in the UK, it's all about, the biggest focus is on workforce diversity. But when you look at supplier diversity, what it does is it basically helps grow entrepreneurship in some of the most deprived areas. And by doing so, you are trying to create more jobs in those communities. That would result in more disposable income, better health, better education. So it has a ripple effect, a multiplier effect, if you actually encourage entrepreneurship in those areas.
Thank you. I'll ask the same question to Ron. And are you able to highlight any specifics that you have seen from the Chamber?
Yes, thank you, and great data. I think the quickest way to create wealth in any community is through entrepreneurship. If you look at Black businesses, though, they face, again, the challenges that many other business owners don't. The average annualized revenue for a Black firm today is less than $100,000 a year. So we have to be specific, because many times the solutions that are being painted by governments as well as corporations come under the umbrella of minority programs. And minority programs have historically not worked for Black business owners. The President of the United States in 2021 came and actually disaggregated the numbers, and what we found is that Black firms only received 1.5% of all of the government spend. Let me say that again, 1.5% of the government spend went to Black firms. And so when we look at being able to create wealth and create new business ownership, as well as large businesses, we've got to make sure that we're holding both the federal government as well as private industry accountable to make sure that we're disaggregating the numbers and we're being specific on who and how we're creating that wealth and how we're making sure that the programs are hitting the communities in which need it the most. And so the U.S. Black Chamber is specifically looking for an intentionality when it comes to programs to make sure that Black businesses, Black communities, and Black people have an opportunity to create the wealth that's needed in our communities.
Thank you, Ron. Claire, does the New York Fed have any specific data around the impact of addressing these inequality issues?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do is we do, to Ron's point, try to unpack the data and to look at specifically the experiences of Black-owned businesses, Hispanic-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and compare them. And so I think I would just underscore a lot of the points that Ron just raised, which is to say that the lived experiences are different. The financial history and the complications of that are different. And so, if we take the pandemic, for example, a huge seismic shock, it affected virtually all small businesses, right? Major disruptions, threats to employment. But when we looked, for example, at government programs as they were initially conceived, they were administered through banks. And there were modifications made in the United States to the mechanisms and the tributaries that we pumped federal dollars out through. But initially relying exclusively on banks meant that firms that did not have relationships with banks, and I would also point out non-employer firms, which are the overwhelming majority of small businesses, were sort of shut out. And so there was a lag there for their access to funds. So we need to be thinking about those mechanisms going forward.
Good, thank you. All right, so Mike, what would you say from a policy perspective? What would be the impact for reducing some of those gaps, inequalities?
I think in the UK, there's a big focus around using public procurement to impact, have a social economic impact. At the same time, the government directives only go till 1/3 of public procurement spend should be with small businesses. It doesn't go beyond that. It doesn't include underserved communities, minority communities. At the same time, the biggest challenge we have and biggest barrier is where do you find minority businesses, because government doesn't monitor ownership of the business. We spoke about that earlier, that the company house, just if I'm a business owner on company house, I am stated as, my nationality is stated as British, but no one knows my ethnic background. So if you don't have that information, you're not going to create and develop policies that are going to make big impact. So my biggest sort of appeal to policymakers, and we have been doing this for the last so many years, to start monitoring ownership of the business. And secondly, change the public procurement policies to make sure that it includes some directive towards spending money with minorities and underrepresented businesses.
Good, thank you. Claire, are there any insights from the New York Fed around the same issue?
I think one of the issues, and Ron and I spoke about this yesterday, is just making sure that firms have kind of the tools and the resources that they need to qualify for those opportunities. So it's not just, I think, setting goals, setting objectives is really important. But for example, if a requirement for being competitive for a contract is you need bonding, well, how do we provide access for that, right? And mechanisms for that. And I think that these are perennial issues, and we kind of need to kind of roll up our sleeves and actually address them and figure out there are mechanisms, there have been pilots that folks have done locally. How do we scale those pilots and make them more broadly accessible?
Awesome, thank you. So, Ron, this is my second to last question. So can you tell us about the US Chamber in particular and the work that the organization does, and what resources and initiatives does the Chamber offer to small business owners and those interested in starting a business?
Thank you. Again, the U.S. Black Chamber is founded on what we call our 5 pillars. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., so our first one is around advocacy. We're making sure that when policies is being discussed here are being discussed on the White House and Capitol Hill, that they make sure that they're taking into consideration the concerns and needs of Black-owned businesses. One of the great ways in which we've been able to demonstrate that is when COVID first hit, the solution presented by the federal government was payroll protection plan. And as stated, the U.S. has over 3 million black firms, 3.2 million black firms, but 3.1 million did not have employees. They're not mom and pops, they're mom or pops, they're single employer firms. And so you had a program that was there to save the employee and not the employer. So it left out all of our businesses. 99% of them weren't able to participate in the solutions that the federal government was creating. And so the U.S. Black Chamber was there to fight to make sure that entrepreneurs, sole proprietors, and black firms were able to compete. Our second one is around access to capital. That is obviously the number one concern of all small business owners, but when you look at a black firm, they will say it's number one, number two, and number three concern. Availability, accessibility, and affordability of that capital. The third one is around contracting. We're making sure that black firms have the opportunity to compete for both federal government contracts as well as on the private sector side. And so you'll see us having partnerships with organizations like the SBA, like the National Minority Supplier Development Council, so that our businesses have the access to be able to be included in those federal as well as private sector contracts. Next one is entrepreneurial training. When COVID happened, again, many of our businesses were forced out of business, but when we interviewed them, more than 70% said the reason that they closed was a lack of information. And so we're making sure that we provide the information and the acumen that those businesses need. And lastly is around chamber development, and that's what we're here doing this afternoon, making sure that our chambers both here in the United Kingdom as well as the United States are all working together to make sure that our voices are heard, our concerns are being addressed, and that we have a voice and a seat at the table.
Awesome, thank you. Time is speeding away, and my last question is going to go to Mayak from MSD UK. So we understand that your organisation works with global corporations and are very interested in the diversity of the supply chain. But the question is, what programs and types of resources does MSD UK have to this end?
I think what we have is we almost become tactical partner for any minority business who is starting. Our big focus has been on working with around 30 universities across the country to identify young entrepreneurs from minority community, especially black founders. And we run an accelerator where we take them through a 3-month of rigorous sort of educational entrepreneurship education with the aim that they become supply chain ready. There are also programs for high growth businesses. We work with top business schools to deliver leadership programs. And most importantly, we keep the pressure on our corporate members to make sure that they not only provide access to opportunities, but there's a genuine commitment. Less than 1% of corporate spend goes to minority businesses in this country. We want to double it, and if we double it, it's going to create more than 8,000 jobs. That's the simple statistics, and that's what we are trying to. So there's a whole range of programs that we support, and also this year, although I don't know whether I should say this, but we also started the similar program in 6 countries across Europe.
Okay, well, you've said it. Thank you so much, everyone. And this has been a really insightful discussion on how entrepreneurship can create wealth across all communities with some really key insights. I want to say a massive thank you to all of our viewers online, and thank you to this audience. You've been absolutely fantastic.
Our next featured plenary, Digital Tools and Rules, Enabling the Environment for Small Businesses to Thrive, is moderated by the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Association for the Self-Employed. Welcome, Keith Hall. Representing Enterprise Nation is its founder and CEO, Emma Jones. And here, on behalf of Gusto, is their Head of Public Policy and Government Affairs, Steve Abbott.
Good morning. What an amazing day. I'm sure you're all impressed with the panels, and I think you're going to be impressed even greater with the panel that we have for you today. We're going to talk about some digital tools. A great honor to be here, so thank you again for being here. Thank you to those who are listening online and watching online. I think you're going to be interested in this. So let's just get into it. I know we have more time, more things to cover than we actually have time. I've apologized to the panel after us because we're going to take all their time. So I apologize to them already. I know for me, this is my first trip since COVID, so it's exciting to get back and be face-to-face with people, so that's very exciting. If there's one silver lining to the pandemic, and I'm not sure our world will ever totally recover from the pandemic, but one silver lining is that we have an increasing reliance on digital tools. Many of those small business owners who have turned to digital tools did so out of necessity, and I think that was critical. But I'll ask each of you to kind of start off, to kind of speak to, Emma, we'll start with you, speak to what have you seen during the pandemic and since as it relates to trends in the usage of digital tools.
Yeah, thank you, Keith, and good morning, and lovely to be here. I'm also loving Keith's competitiveness, because I met Keith last night, and if he says to me once more, Emma, our panel has to be the best session. So, no pressure, Chair, but, so yes, I'm Emma Jones, founder of a business called Enterprise Nation. We are a platform that helps lots of small businesses get access to support and resource. And so what we saw, and it kind of feels like a long time ago now, but lockdown hit, as it did, of course, in every country, and we had thousands of businesses come onto our platform, and the first kind of response was what we called the dash for cash, because it was small businesses saying, how am I going to keep my funding going? How will I pay the bills? Anyway, we kind of got through that first phase in terms of, furlough was launched, lots of safety programs for small businesses. And then we did move into the phase of digital adoption. And it was an incredible time because there's kind of no government representative as such on this panel, but if you talk to the UK government at that time, what the UK would say is things that the UK government was trying to nudge and encourage that could have taken about 10 years happened in the space of 3 months. This mass digital adoption of small businesses who weren't online, saying, right, I need to get a website, I need to figure out social media, how do I connect with my customers? And actually, one thing that I will still hold as a very dear memory from that time is how private sector companies stepped up to deliver that support. So I see Amazon in the audience at the time, and Ben's kind of sitting here in the audience. We worked very closely with Amazon pretty much from kind of April 2020 to launch a program which kind of went live a couple of months later called Amazon Small Business Accelerator. And what we stepped up was this huge training program that said to small businesses, we are here to help you figure out your digital footprint. So ASVA, as we call it for short, launched, is still going, which is just incredible to see. MasterCard are in the audience. They have an incredible program called Strive. At the time, Salesforce came to us and said, we've got small business cash grants that we want to get out. So there was this incredible private sector response. And I genuinely think that saved a lot of small businesses from going down at a time that was a very desperate time. So kind of moving forward to kind of current day, so that was very much the area of digital adoption. What I think we're now in, which I think is really interesting, is I guess what we call digital sophistication. So businesses adopted digital tools. At the time, it's quite basic. It was website builders, basic cloud accounting. I know Team Intuit are in the house. So businesses were adopting basic digital tools. What they're now saying is actually, how do I become more sophisticated in using those tools to become a more sophisticated business? So just to kind of finish off on this, because it's a huge area of opportunity that we're trying to figure out at Enterprise Nation, which is businesses are now saying to us, I've had this plethora of learning of digital. I've kind of tried to figure out the tools I need to adopt. What small businesses are now saying is, can someone just tell me how do I best spend my time and my money? So what are the things that I should now be focusing on to become more effective? So what we're looking at this is kind of how do we personalize the delivery of business support? How do we find out information about business owners and then absolutely target them to say, we think if you spent your time and money on Google Ads or on digital operations and bringing CRM into your business, that would have the most effective response. So I guess in summary, big digital adoption that happened, which was great. Now we're getting into this era of digital sophistication, but then that just means that all support providers have to be as sophisticated as the businesses that we serve and make sure we get the right support to them.
Steve?
So first off, I learned from Emma last night that Gusto in the UK is a food company that's well known. So we are not currently in the UK market, but Gusto is a small business payroll HR benefits platform. So I was going to say some other things first, but after hearing Emma's comments, the world shut down in March of 2020. And, you know, that had such ramifications for our labor force and the small business owners, right? And so, you know, the U.S.'s response, and we heard a bit about it earlier through the Paycheck Protection Program, we were very quick to act because we still have a substantial number of our customers with fewer than 25 employees. And so we partnered up pretty quickly with PPP lenders, and we processed $4.5 billion of loans to our small business customers, along with the earned income or employee retention tax credit as well, to ensure that they had the resources needed. But that was spun up very quickly, and Michael from the White House mentioned this too, is that the first tranche of the Trump administration, money was just kind of going out the door. It was kind of haphazard, and we clearly saw it didn't get to certain communities. And that's another big point here, is we see this all the time, the sort of disparities in sort of access to capital, but also just resourcing, right, for lots of underserved communities. And so there was another reference earlier about the Infrastructure Act that has lots of billions of dollars for increased broadband to certain communities. And, you know, that was a major thing. Like, businesses that operated in person all of a sudden had to do it virtually. And you can't do that without, you know, reliable internet connection. And, you know, storefronts that didn't have a web presence all of a sudden had to have a web presence. And these things are all, you know, you have to have access to high-speed internet in order to make that work. And so, you know, that was the one thing that was really brought to light, is the pandemic really unearthed sort of like these, you know, disparities we had even amongst business owners. You know, and then from our platform, you know, looking back at the end, because we were very focused on making sure our customers had the resources we needed, but just sort of, you know, we have lots of professional services businesses and what we call desk employees, so people that work are college educated. And, you know, just I'm thinking of a specific example of a customer that was a software company based in Seattle that was 18 employees, largely based in Washington State before the pandemic, but during the pandemic went to having, you know, a workforce in Idaho, in Colorado, in California, and Ohio. And so a company that previously only had to worry about Washington State payroll taxes and Seattle paid leave programs now all of a sudden has to worry about Colorado and Utah and Idaho, and that's different, and different requirements, different compliance requirements. And so, you know, you can do that manually, but that's why we exist at Gusto, to sort of help automate that. And, you know, what we call eradicating customer pain is to make sure that you're able to stay compliant. And that's a trend that hasn't gone away. And so, you know, but it also is an opportunity, because small business owners now, because of digital access and tools, they can hire people across the United States. But we also have built in, through an acquisition, we are able to make international contractor payments in over 100 countries. So even though we do not employ people in the UK, a small business owner in Dallas, Texas, can hire somebody in the UK to work for them, and we can facilitate that payment. And so, you know, a lot of what we try to do is also kind of democratize some benefits and services that had previously been held to sort of more resource, larger companies. And so the digital, you know, transformation and using tools like Gusto and some of our partners, I'll give a plug to our, you know, the anchor sponsor Intuit, because we do have an integration with QuickBooks, is also allowing opportunities for smaller businesses that previously didn't exist. And, you know, the pandemic really was a catalyst for that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think as we go through this process, we've talked about learning. You mentioned learning, Emma. You mentioned sophistication. I think, Steve, you mentioned about having new opportunities to hire worldwide. And I ask both of you this, but Steve, I'll start with you. But talk a little more about, you know, clearly reliance on digital tools are here to stay. I tell everybody, one of these days, this internet's going to be big. I mean, one of these days, the internet's going to be big. But clearly, this digitization is here to stay. But speak a little bit more about what do you see are some of the key benefits for some of our listeners, people here, of embracing these new tools. What are some of the key benefits that you see coming?
So we do a new employer survey on our platform of, you know, people that have started new businesses every year. And the one thing they cite as their biggest need is more time. So, you know, that we take to the heart. And that's ahead of such as like tax credits, government grants, et cetera. And so we think about digitization in sort of two ways, right? You have the customer-facing piece of it, and then you also have like sort of the employee/back-end HR management piece of it. And so like we, you know, integrations with like point-of-sale terminals, your email marketing, your billing, your payment system, and, you know, businesses, you know, there's a cost to adopting that, right? And people can be stubborn. And if you have sort of a smaller business that's run it's running fine and you have a lifestyle, but you could sort of optimize it and create more by adopting these tools, that has a huge benefit. And, you know, we've only seen that it does. People, you know, by making that initial investment, by utilizing Shopify and Clover and other services available out there, you can sort of optimize your business, but also create a better customer experience, right? And so, but that also allows scalability, right? So processes that you were doing manually, you're relying on employees, you now can sort of, you know, devote that to sort of maybe business expansion or new product offerings. And then on the back end is sort of the people management, right? So being able to pay them, being able to offer benefits, being able to sort of, you know, track time off, project management, and so forth like that. And having the integrations with bookkeeping software, those are very, you know, essential things that if you can streamline it and make, you know, basically save time for yourself and your employees while also creating a better experience, it can only benefit you. And if you choose to want to scale your business, that's going to allow you to do that as opposed to being, you know, overly reliant on manual processes.
And I would just endorse that. And I guess from a UK perspective, and this has been a really interesting thing of this event, is kind of almost words and terminology that's used that's different between the UK and the US. So in the UK for about 3 years, if not more, the government has talked about something called the productivity puzzle. So it's still this kind of great unknown in the UK as how do we become more productive? And it always used to make me smile. There's a brilliant man called Charlie Mayfield who started an organisation called Be the Business to solve the productivity puzzle. And I always used to think kind of the issue is again, kind of back to this constituent of small businesses. Small business owners don't wake up in a morning and think, oh, how can I be more productive today? And so it just always used to bother me that kind of government is looking at this macroeconomic level of how do we solve this productivity puzzle, where what a small business owner wakes up and thinks is, how do I find more customers? How do I keep my team happy? And how do I do all of this whilst managing my costs? And so that's where I think digital technology comes in, is just across all of those levels, you can reach more customers, you can keep your team happy. It's becoming even more important because, of course, we're all, and I myself am a founder, we've got a team of about 48 people. I hardly ever see them anymore, so everyone's battling with this. How do you manage hybrid teams? So digital technology is becoming more important. So digital can help with the whole sphere of productivity. But I do come back to this point, and again, in every great market, all of these opportunities come in. And in fact, Steve and I were talking that kind of in the US, there's 10 million small businesses. I hope this isn't untoward to say, but Gusto represents 5% of the market. And you're kind of like, wow, so who's representing that kind of other 95%? They've probably got lots of different selections they can make. And this is where I come back to this point is, it's great that all these opportunities are there for small businesses to make the most of digitalization, to become more productive, but then there does become this abundance of choice. So then you kind of almost, you're trying to help them become more productive, but then they've got this massive amount of choice. And so the most productive thing you can do to a business owner is to say, at this stage in your journey, we think this is the tool, the advisor, the service that is right for you right now. So how do we get that true productivity gain? By coming up with that puzzle of what type of support intervention works the best regardless of where you are and which sector you're in. So if we can get that, I think we'll have got a full circle of getting digitization benefits.
Yeah, I think that's critical. And I think Steve mentioned this last night, and you mentioned it earlier, that you know, the number one asset most small business owners have is their time. And maximizing that time is the undergrowth of all of this conversation that we're having. And this may be the same question, Steve, I'll apologize for that, but let's get a little more detail. Gusto is a platform that focuses on digitizing solutions like payroll, benefits for employees, HR benefits. So tell us a little bit more about the future. How is Gusto maximizing this reliance on digital tools?
So to Emma's point, like we really try to understand our customer base and trends to be sort of opinionated, but also advising small business owners on different things they need to do. And so, like, for example, like better understanding about, you know, different benefit offerings across like your sector. So you can maintain competitiveness, because you're not going to hire an Aon Hewitt or another consultant to sort of benchmark your employee salaries and your different benefits. But we have now, and we have some of this data public on our economic trends tracker, where you can look at sort of like average wages in the city, and you can break it down by different sectors. So we're trying to use that so we can learn more about our customers. Some of the bigger trends we're seeing is usage of contractors, independent contractors by small business owners. They are becoming more reliant on them. And so, you know, I mentioned earlier about being able to sort of facilitate international and domestic payments for that. But in the US, like, we have this, it's been a fight over what we call worker classification, because if you're a full-time employee, there are lots of like legal protections you have, and there's employer obligations, but if you cross that line and become an independent contractor, you're kind of on your own. You're kind of your own micro business in a lot of ways. And I want to differentiate the typical contractor on our platform tends to be doing it out of choice. We have 70-some% that have a 4-year degree, a bachelor's degree, and so they're doing it like differently than what we typically think of as the quote-unquote gig workers, so the people that are driving for Uber or making something for Etsy. And so, but it was one of the interesting findings is small business, or at least our customer base is becoming not overly reliant, but utilizing them. And it's expensive to hire an employee. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter is. And so I think we're kind of seeing this nice, like sort of choice by people in the labor force wanting to have more flexibility and control over their working relationship, but also like coming at the same time where, you know, we don't have to always rely on an individual business to add another employee. Now, you know, creating a benefit structure that supports independent contractors is a separate conversation. Another thing I mentioned about benefits operating at benchmarks, we're seeing that offering of employee benefits is actually preventing churn. And that's becoming more important, especially post-pandemic, is workers want more flexibility. I mean, paid time off became a big issue, right? Being able, and not just for like, you know, what we think of as maternity leave, but also as a caregiver, right? I mean, you know, the UK has probably similar problems. 65,000 people a day turn 65 in the US. And this is largely also falling on women. And the working force is they're what quote unquote sandwich generations where they're taking care of their children, but also their parents. And so these things that, you know, people used to be driven more just by salary, we're seeing they're being driven more by all these extra benefits and flexibility. And one last finding on this point is we see that offering of retirement benefits is now, it reduces your risk of employee attrition by 1/3 in the first year, which when you factor in the costs of like employee churn, it becomes kind of a no-brainer to sort of offering retirement benefits. And so I think that like post-pandemic, that's been a big thing, is employees want a more holistic package as opposed to just pay.
Yeah, I think it's interesting also, there's a dichotomy there because as small business owners move more toward using independent contractors to meet their needs, each of those independent contractors by definition is also a new small business. So that's interesting because now they have the same questions that we had before. So I think that's very interesting. Emma, from a UK perspective, what do you see as the unique challenges or opportunities for small businesses as it relates to digital tools?
Well, I guess maybe one thing to mention about the government. So, of course, I was saying to all of our US friends last night that yesterday we had the budget. And the Enterprise Nation line on the budget yesterday is there was very slim pickings for small business. There was not much to cheer about for small businesses in the budget, which makes me very sad to say. And actually, just kind of to this point of digitization is so much of the infrastructure I do feel has to come from a government level to try and spur growth. And we did have in the UK a program called Help to Grow Digital. Craig mentioned before, kind of there's a Help to Grow was launched by our current Prime Minister when he was Chancellor. And there's two elements to it. One aspect called Help to Grow Digital. There's another bit called Help to Grow Management. Management is still running, but digital got up and running and then closed down. I know today's session is not for the reasons around why that closed, but it wasn't designed by small businesses with small businesses, but I think it would have been more successful if it had been. So we are currently without a national government digital program, which I think is a gap. And then another issue we have in the UK is we introduced something called Making Tax Digital, which was introduced for VAT-registered businesses, so businesses with over £85,000 turnover. And what that essentially does is force small businesses to use cloud accounting software because they have to digitally file their records. And there's lots of discussion about whether that was a good or a bad thing. At Enterprise Nation, we thought it was a good thing because it forced more small businesses to adopt digital tools. So Making Tax Digital was meant to go further and be expanded to people who pay income tax self-assessment. So it would have brought up lots of more small businesses to say, right, become more digital. The government has slowed down the implementation of that, so we don't even know now when that will be implemented. So I feel always to try and get the benefits of a trend that's happening in the economy, in this case being digitisation, you need small businesses to do their thing, which they actively are. They're saying we see the benefits of the tools, we want to adopt these tools, but you also need this top-down vision and infrastructure approach. So I think that is a challenge. How do we continue to get the conversation to government, Treasury right opposite us? How do we try and encourage them to say, please reconsider bringing Making Tax Digital back into force, because it will encourage businesses to adopt these digital technologies. And I come back to the kind of role of the private sector, because Enterprise Nation is a private company. We're kind of a for-profit private business. So I always feel that hopefully puts us in a good position that we can offer constructive feedback and criticism to the government. And so we had a Minister for Small Business called Paul Scully. He's now our Minister for Digital and Tech. So we hosted a dinner for him in early January, where we helped to grow digital. It had been announced it was closing down. And we said to him, we think that's a great shame, because the whole concept of Help to Grow Digital is how do you help small businesses assess the tools they need, match them to the right tools, and then give them an inducement of a voucher, which was a voucher you could spend on buying the product. So we said, look, we think that's really sound. It's a shame that it wasn't implemented well, so it's closing. But how can we help you from a private sector perspective? So we did bring together Amazon, TikTok, Etsy, Microsoft, Vodafone, Dell, MasterCard. We brought together these amazing private sector brands. And what we're kind of looking to, because I never want to be a person who criticises without actually saying, can we try and do something to help? So we're now kind of working with our partners to say, can we build out this journey for small businesses? So can we attract lots of businesses, quickly assess the digital solution they need, connect them to that solution in a trusted environment, and then let's measure the impact in terms of what that's delivering. So I hope that's an opportunity, but as I say, kind of from a government perspective, I think organisations like Enterprise Nation, like FSB, we've still got a lot of work to do. And I kind of joked about this yesterday, that my voice is very, I don't think it's COVID, but my voice is kind of very limited at the moment. Yeah, Keith, you're fine. But I kind of joked at this dinner saying kind of the reason my voice is like this at the moment is we're trying to give a voice for small business. And in the UK at the moment, that's a hard job. We've never had to work harder, because of course quite often you have, with changing governments, is you have changing interests from individuals on the inside, and we need to increase the engagement, because the more connected small businesses are to policymakers, to the Chancellor, to the Prime Minister, the result of that is definitely going to be better designed programmes that deliver the growth that we're looking for.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I was actually going to ask about how can the private sectors and public sectors work together. I think you answered that wonderfully. Thank you to Amazon, thank you to Intuit, because having that joint venture to promote this issue, I think is critical. I think that's very important. What I'd like to do maybe is close this out. Steve, I'll start with you, but if you could look at the small businesses in the audience, those that are listening online, as it relates to digital tools or even your platform, if you could give one thing to do, one piece of advice, what's the one thing you would tell small business owners today about digital tools?
Use Gusto.
Mine was going to be visit Enterprise Nation, so we're as bad as each other.
What the two things would you would tell?
And Intuit QuickBooks. So basically, like, going back to the time need, right? Like, focus in on utilizing tools that can sort of, ease the burden of your time, and sort of so you can sort of manage your business better and focus in on what you do and grow. Bite the bullet. I know there's upfront cost to it, and there's going to be changes and learning, but that's going to be essential for you to sort of, grow your business and be able to take care of your teams.
Emma?
Yeah, and I think mine would be to get advice. So get advice from people who look like you. And I know this is not necessarily kind of entrepreneurs in the audience, because we've got lots of policymakers and other stakeholders who've got a vested interest. But I think for a small business audience, seek advice from your peers, but of course seek advice from this growing digital advisor community of people who are becoming accredited in things like how to use Meta, how to use Google Ads. Get advice from those people because they're the ones who can tell you how to best spend your time and money.
Fantastic. And I think that's the way I would like to summarize our part of the section. I think you've seen for previous panels, from this panels, if you forget everything else that you've learned today, that you've seen today, organizations like these two with quality people like these two, recognizing that no matter what question you have, you're not alone. There are resources out there to help you be successful, to help you grow, to help you digitize. And I think of all the things that you're going to see today, that you're going to learn today, that's the single most important thing that you should take away from this session. So please thank our two guests here. Wonderful information. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Now, here to introduce our next fireside chat, The Role of Women, Global Entrepreneurship and Public Policy Change, please welcome to the stage Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs for the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Cynthia Jaramillo.
Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to be with you in London today and this week. I am proud to represent the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, where we support over 5 million Hispanic businesses who combined contribute $800 billion to the U.S. economy each year. At the USHCC, it is our mission to integrate Hispanic businesses into a prospering and sustainable global economy. And now, to the best part. I am privileged to introduce, in my opinion, humble opinion, one of the most important conversations today, a fireside chat regarding the role of women in global entrepreneurship and public policy change. Your moderator today is CEO of the Association of Women's Business Centers, Ms. Corinne Gavel. Former administrator from 2009 to 2013, U.S. Small Business Administration, Ms. Karen Mills. Chief Executive Officer, Sherry Blair Foundation for Women, Ms. Helen McEachran. And last but certainly not least, Acting Senior Vice President, Export-Import Bank of the United States, Ms. Tamara Maxwell.
What a pleasure it is to be with you all today. Let's set the scene, shall we? I'd like to ask each of our panelists here today, starting with you, Karen, to give us some background and context. What trends, challenges, and opportunities do women face when it comes to entrepreneurship?
Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here and to be talking on this panel about entrepreneurship, but my favorite part of entrepreneurship, which are the women entrepreneurs. It turns out that in the United States, half the people who work own or work for a small business. But small business is more than that. It's the path to the American dream. It's the way you can build wealth. It's the way you can build access and opportunity. But in the US, 30% of the small businesses are owned by women. So that's 12 million businesses, but only 1 million of them have employees. So they tend to be the smaller businesses. And as a result, they get less. They get less attention, they get less opportunity, and they get less capital. So one of the things I want to come back to and talk a little bit more about is how can we solve that problem? How can we get more access and opportunity and capital into the hands of women-owned small businesses so they can do what they do best, which is grow their businesses, provide jobs, and help the economy?
Great, thank you very much. So it's also wonderful to be with you today. The Cherie Blair Foundation for Women focuses on low and middle income countries. So we're talking about women entrepreneurs who are in emerging economies. And they face similar challenges to women entrepreneurs in the United States, but in many ways exacerbated by the environment in which they're in. So we know the macroeconomic environment is incredibly hostile at the moment, and it was hostile coming out of COVID, and it has been exacerbated by inflation. And research we recently did, 9 out of 10 women we spoke to told us that inflation was devastating their business opportunities. So that's a massive trend and challenge for women. So things are not getting easier, they're getting harder. And if we overlay that with the barriers that women face, that we know they face, so the financing gap, globally the financing gap is estimated by the WeFi at $1.7 trillion US. Women we speak to through our work, only 38% of them are accessing finance through any kind of formal avenue. Women entrepreneurs are also being impacted by unpaid care. We know that increased during the pandemic. 3 to 5 times as much unpaid care is done by women than men. That is holding women entrepreneurs back. Women we speak to are telling us that they think 20% impact on their business through unpaid care. So when you put these issues together, women's barriers are much higher as entrepreneurs than men, and they are unfortunately increasing. The opportunity, however, is that we know that that gap is there. We've begun to measure it. We didn't used to measure it. There's still more work to be done. But the fact that we've begun to measure it means we can do something about it, which hopefully we'll talk to in the next questions. Thank you.
So thank you guys. Can you guys hear me? Is this working? Sounds like, okay, there we go. Great. So thank you guys for being here. Excited to be here to talk about this issue with women entrepreneurs. At Ex-Im Bank, we focus on exporting. So you can imagine all of the barriers that are already there for women businesses to do business domestically. It's triple-fold when it comes to doing business in an international market. So we've talked a lot about the barriers, and the main one is financing. But at Ex-Im Bank, we've been focusing on minority and women-owned businesses for over 20 years. I actually created the division at Ex-Im. So I've seen over the last 20 to 25 years the challenges that women face. One of the things that I'm happy and proud to say is that women businesses understand what it takes to do business internationally. They're not afraid. Once they see what the opportunity is, they actually take it and they move forward with it. And I think that comes from the fact that women who own businesses are also mothers, their daughters, their sisters, their aunts. And this is something that does not change. And we're accustomed to taking care of the family while we're still running businesses, while we're still working, we're doing all that. So I know that there's challenges, but I look at the resilience of women and how that has moved forward over the years and will continue to strive, and hopefully more women businesses will take the opportunity to export.
Thank you, Tammy. I'd like to shift here back to Karen. You mentioned that women businesses are your priority. You are a woman, and as an appointee of the Obama administration, you served as the U.S. SBA administrator during the Obama administration. What are your thoughts on the state of women entrepreneurship in terms of what should be prioritized now so that women can continue to evolve?
Well, first of all, hello to many of the folks who served with me and are still serving in the U.S. government. And I'm really very glad to have the U.S. and the U.K. come together in this entrepreneurship forum, because we have so much to learn from each other on what I think is the critical key to unlocking more access and opportunity for women entrepreneurs, and that is access to capital. And it was interesting, my fellow panelists, we all went right there. There's a huge gap. You actually said a very big number globally. But one of the things that we know is that when you go to traditional financing, they are less likely to give women-owned businesses a loan. Maybe because they're smaller, maybe because of some other frictions and biases in the system. But the numbers are 67% of women get their loans from the banks versus 47% of women get access to capital versus 61% for men. And by the way, that number reverses right now at the SBA. 61% of the women get it versus 50% of the men. And that's because one of the primary policy objectives in the US government is to make sure that people who are falling through the gap in the marketplace get that access and opportunity. But how can we do that better? And interestingly, technology is about to change the game in developing countries and in the emerging countries as well, because the frictions that exist in lending really come from the fact that it's difficult to see inside a small business. It's difficult to trust that that entrepreneur is really going to make money. And we call that, economists call that information opacity. And the other friction is heterogeneity. It means that all small businesses are different. So one day you're lending to a cafe, the next day you're lending to a dry cleaner, and you can't really tell what's a good dry cleaner and what's a bad dry cleaner. But if I give you data on 1,000 dry cleaners, you can pretty well tell what the 1,000th and first, is that a good dry cleaner or a bad dry cleaner? So big data and artificial intelligence are going to have an enormous impact on small business lending. They're going to remove some of these barriers and frictions. How do we make sure that that flows through to getting more loans in the hands of currently underserved small businesses? We have a whole array of other entrepreneurs who have started fintech businesses. And I'm here in the UK. I wrote a book, Fintech, Small Business and the American Dream, that talked about these gaps in lending and how fintechs could change the game, what we needed to do in terms of regulation. We have a lot to learn from the UK policymakers on this front. They are ahead of the US on open banking. They are ahead of the US on a whole set of constructs to make sure we open up our lending to more responsible lenders who will give more opportunity for people who might not make it through the screen in a traditional banking environment. I love our US banks. They were my great partners. But we need more. We need more access and opportunity to do the job. That can be CDFIs, but that also we all have to harness technology. And my last point is, we learned this in the pandemic, when in the first tranche of our Paycheck Protection Program, the banks just gave to their regular customers. And who got left out? Women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, particularly Black-owned businesses. And when we used technology and sent that money through other more automated systems, guess what? All of our small businesses got access at that point. We need to do better.
Thank you so much for that. I'd like to switch to Helen. Helen, as a reminder, the Blair Foundation's work focuses on women and girls in low and middle income countries. You talked about we're now measuring things, and this is addressing a gap, but what progress is being made in women's entrepreneurship globally? What more can be done? And what does the foundation, how does the foundation serving these underserved areas around the world?
Thank you very much. So I might pick up a little bit from where you left off. So the pandemic had a significant impact on digital financial inclusion. And that was incredibly important. So we saw the gap close from 9 to 6%, which sort of sounds like a relatively small number. But what happened is, because governments in many low and middle income countries, unfortunately not all, transferred money to people digitally, digital payments, it brought people inside the mobile money system, and mobile money increased. From mobile money, it acts as a gateway to potentially financial inclusion, to banking, and then on to being able to keep records. If you've got records, then you can access finance. So this massive sort of progress that was one of the more positive, not many positive, but positive outcomes of the pandemic. So that presents an opportunity for women entrepreneurs because they are invisible, and they're even more invisible when they're informal. The majority of women entrepreneurs in low and middle income countries have informal, unregistered businesses, and they're also operating in more fragile sectors. So if that's an opportunity, what can we do about it? So now, coming to the foundation, we deliver services for and with women entrepreneurs in low and middle income countries. And one of those services that I think it's helpful to share is called Her Venture. It's a mobile learning app. It provides tailored lessons in business skills, financial literacy, digital skills, e-commerce, digital marketing, mobile money, and how you can use that as a women entrepreneur. And it's tailored to them, and because it's mobile, it can reach them where they are. They can use it on their agenda, on their time frame. They can use it operating in a market stall. They can use it at home, and it's digital light, so it's tailored to them. And what we found over the pandemic was we'd already piloted that program, but we were able to reach 80,000 women entrepreneurs directly with that service because it was tailored to them, both the context they lived in, their gendered barriers, as well as sort of putting the information in their hands. And then that, linked to the opportunity with digital financial inclusions, means that they're actually able to show their business. Now, they still face gendered barriers. Gender stereotypes operate across all the barriers. And we have to be aware of that is the reason why women are discriminated against in the financial sector, in their homes. It limits their business opportunities, their access to markets, their access to networks. So we have to be aware of that and create gendered services, and that's what the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women does. And we do it in other areas as well, but I think a mobile app is an example of something that's very relevant to the issues we have today. Thank you.
Perfect. Sort of switching our theme a little bit to exporting as a method of advancing women, what benefits does exporting provide for underserved entrepreneurs like minorities and women?
Great question. So when it comes to minority and women businesses, when you look at exporting, there's always a huge benefit for them. The pandemic showed us that businesses need to diversify their portfolio, and exporting actually gives you that opportunity. We have so many businesses at XM that continued, and they stayed in business simply because when that pandemic hit, they were exporting. Also, when businesses are looking at and they go to other countries, people, as some of the panels said earlier, people want to do business with people who look like them, who understand them, and who can relate to them. And that's what women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses are. In other countries, they understand. So the advantage of them doing business and exporting is that they're bringing a U.S. product or service, which is number one, over top anything else. So they look at the product and the service, but then they also look at you and who they're doing business with. So it definitely is a benefit for them to start looking at exporting and utilizing all of the U.S. government services that are available. And that's the key. A lot of businesses don't understand the over 17 government agencies who are there in the U.S. to help them export in their export journey.
Let's dig a little deeper into that help. Stay with you, Tammy, and at the XM Bank, could you share a little bit, give some insight on what are the resources that XM Bank does provide for women interested in international trade and expanding to global markets?
Okay, great. As I mentioned before, I actually created the Minority and Women-Owned Business Division at XM back in 2000, so a long time ago. Prior to the Biden administration putting in the executive orders, which has everyone in the United States focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, XM was always an agency that did that. We provide financial assistance in many different ways. We provide working capital guarantees, which is where you have a U.S. Lender who gives you we guarantee them if they lend to U.S. businesses to meet a contract order or to be able to export. That's one program. Then the main one that really we focus on for women-owned businesses is our export credit insurance, which gives the businesses the ability to offer terms to any country that we're open to do business in. So of course, who doesn't want to buy on terms? Who doesn't want to do that? Everybody wants to do that. But we give the U.S. company the comfort level to do that. And we say, if you sell to them on terms, we guarantee if they don't pay, you file a claim to us and we'll pay. So essentially, you're opening up a checkbook for the entire world, as long as we're open to do business there. Then with the division that we have, the Women-Owned Business Division, we understand and we know that businesses coming to XM to receive the financing, they're not always ready for us. So we understand what the other programs are. So Department of Commerce, they talked about the Gold Key program, SBA and what they offer, USTDA, all of the government agencies, we understand all of their programs, and we send them to the correct departments if we cannot answer their question. And then we work with them until they're ready for XM financing, because a lot of times they're not. One of the other things that we're working on at XM Bank is that we understand, as we're all saying, that finance to women businesses and minority businesses is, it's almost not there. So one of the reasons that we recognize it's not there is because you don't have a lot of women or a lot of minorities in the position who's doing the lending, who's looking at the credits, who's looking at everything. So that's something that we're focusing on educating the schooling systems in the United States, the ones that are the HBCUs, the historically black colleges, the Latino colleges, to educate those schools to have people go into international finance, and we hope that that will be a way. It's going to be a huge project, and it's a long time, but we know that that'll be a start to getting those people into those lines.
Maybe a couple paragraphs ago, you mentioned about partnerships and helping the clients you serve. If you don't have something that can help them, you refer them to other programs that can. And we appreciate your partnership. Women's business centers are just such one example of a public-private partnership that's partnering with federal government to do that. And so I think that's going to be the closing theme here of the next question that we'll run through to all of you. And I'll start with you, Karen. What can the public and private sectors do together to advance women's entrepreneurship and, of course, share any examples?
Well, I'm a great believer in public-private partnerships, and in fact, the SBA is a perfect example of public-private partnership because it works with other lenders, banks, and soon we hope other lenders, fintech lenders, and it saves government resources because actually it takes that whole distribution center, and all the government does is provide a guarantee. So it's almost a no-cost program. The other thing, though, that small businesses need does cost money, and that's advice and counsel. And that's what happens in all the kinds, in the minority business centers, in the XM Bank, and there's almost in the women's business centers, all the small business development centers, there's over 900 that the SBA runs, and it's not even enough. So once again, the private sector needs to figure out how to help small businesses. The other interesting secret that I've been working on is the supply chain. How larger businesses in the supply chain can treat their small businesses as partners. And the government, the US government, has done a great job of this in its small business contracting program. By, in my tenure, being, able to raise that and now meet the goals of women-owned small businesses being 5%, and all small businesses meeting their goals. And when I was SBA administrator, I came here and spoke with the UK government, and the UK government put in, liked the idea, and put in an even larger goal, and then met it before we even met ours. So congratulations to the UK. We can learn some lessons for how to make sure that people in the supply chain, even in the private sector supply chain, treat their small business suppliers as partners. They make sure that those small businesses are diverse. They make sure those small businesses have access to capital. They help them find banks. They make sure those businesses know what technology they need to invest in order to keep the contracts and get the contracts. If we do those kinds of things, particularly with an idea of making sure our smallest but excellent women-owned businesses get those contracts, I think we will have more access and opportunity, and we'll also have better supply chains.
Couldn't agree more. So, you know, we know about the gap, and the gap for women, the supply chain gap, I think women have access to slightly less than 2% of global supply chains, women-owned businesses, less than 2%. And we know that if women had equal access to men to start and grow businesses, that the opportunity is $5 to $6 trillion. So WeFi tells us globally that that's the opportunity, $5 to $6 trillion. And right now, there's only less than 2% in the global supply chain. So what are we going to do about it? Absolutely, we need services, we need support, and it does cost money. But if that support is not gendered, if we are not deliberately designing products, services, support that is gendered, we are actively discriminating against women. That's what the public, private sectors both need to realise, as does civil society, which is where we operate. But because being gender blind, being gender neutral is not going to close that gap, is not going to open that opportunity, which means you have to do the research, you have to speak to women, you need to understand the barriers that they face, and they'll be different in different contexts, different minorities. But if we want to open that opportunity up, the public sector needs to look at its procurement practices. It sounds like great progress is being made, but clearly more needs to be made. Corporations need to look at supply chain practices and how they're providing opportunities and design the products and services for them. Telecommunications, financial sector. The opportunity is there, we're measuring it, but we are still not going fast enough to close that gap. And so the Sherry Blair Foundation for Women is very happy to partner with public and private. We had a wonderful partnership with the US government and Qualcomm to try and reach women entrepreneurs in Indonesia and Vietnam. And through that partnership, 12,000 women entrepreneurs' business opportunities were transformed. And by any measures, it was cheap. So for $900,000, that was possible. So the opportunities are there, we know what the problem is, but we have to be deliberate, and we have to realise that by not being gendered in our approach, we are discriminating. Thank you.
So what I would say, XM, as I mentioned, has been around for 89 years. But this year, well, not this year, Chair Lewis is the first minority in the history of XM Bank, and she's a woman. So we're proud of that. And so one of the things first thing that she did was she came on board, she created the Advancing Women Council at XM. She also created the Small Business Council. And these two councils is key to making sure that we partner with the right organizations. Our agency has the ability to lend or do financing up to $135 billion. That's our lending cap. We do not reach that, and we don't reach that because we, in the U.S., are considered the best kept secret. But we don't want to be a secret. We're very small compared to other government agencies. We're less than 400, and we're responsible for educating the world about XM Bank. So the only way that we're going to do that is by those private-public partnerships. We partner with just about every minority or women organization out there, some who are here today, NABO, with Corinne and her organization, with the Minority Supplier Development Council, which they have the UK partner here, to help us educate women businesses about XM, who we are, what we do, and how we can assist them to grow their business internationally. So it's critical that we have these partnerships.
I've absolutely loved this panel, and I work in this space pretty much 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you've all given me something really exciting to walk away from. And I'd like to underscore some of the sort of quotes that I've written down that you've shared, so that I hope that our audience can also walk away with these same impressions. You've said a lot of powerful things, but I'd just like to choose one thing. You said technology is changing the game. We're leaving some entrepreneurs behind because they don't have access to technology, and so then it comes back to the supports. And this just leads directly, Helen, into one of the quotes that I've underscored for you, which is, if that support is not gendered, then it's inadvertently discriminatory. You could open so many doors for me. I'm going to put that quote, I think, right on our website. It was wonderful. And access to capital was such a theme here. And you shared, Tammy, that you have $135 billion and you can't get rid of it. And so I think with technology, support, and capital, we've got the keys to all of the success of growing women's entrepreneurship in the US and UK. So just do what these panelists say and we can solve our problem. Thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you.
Moderating our next discussion, How Public Policy Influences Global Entrepreneurship, is Co-Executive Director for the Small Business Roundtable. Please offer a warm welcome to John Stanford. Representing the United States Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship is Majority Staff Director Sean Moore. And his counterpart, Minority Staff Director Meredith West. Our final panelist is the founder of the Entrepreneurs Network, Philip Salter.
All right, well, thank you to my esteemed guests, some who have traveled across the pond, some who have traveled down the road, for what I think is an important conversation to tee up the next couple speakers about just the role of policy in this. And so I'm thrilled to have colleagues from the US and UK here. And let's dive right in. Philip, I'm going to start with you before we turn our attention to our US colleagues. You have home court advantage with the first question. The budget, we should note, the budget for the United Kingdom dropped yesterday. Whether it's that document or otherwise, what can we expect out of His Majesty's government? A phrase I never thought I was going to get to say. What can we expect in terms of small business policy, and what did you see in that budget?
I mean, well, I guess first and foremost, we still have a government. It hasn't collapsed straight away like last time, so that's one thing we can all be grateful for. I think in terms of context, it's a pro-business budget, but it's not a pro-business budget for all businesses, I think would be the way to phrase it. If you think of Rishi himself, he's kind of been over to the US, enamored by Silicon Valley, studied at Stanford, very much kind of changed his life. And I think that you can kind of see that in the way that he has kind of focused his policy. So a lot of the policy is kind of a legacy also of previous governments. We've got things like ARIA, which is a kind of modeled on DARPA, although without yet the money that DARPA got. Yesterday we saw things like full expensing, which is very much focused on large businesses investing a lot, have a lot of focus on particular industries, so whether that's AI or life sciences, these are the kind of darlings of the current government. And we have kind of more funding for science in general, so I think this is the kind of mechanism in which they're seeing economic growth in the future. Kind of specifically for smaller businesses, they're kind of going to struggle because R&D funding has been cut for non-kind of research-intensive businesses. This is quite significant. You have to be kind of spending 40% plus on R&D to qualify for them, and so that's really kind of pulled the rug underneath from those businesses. And it was also kind of a sin of omission in a way. There really was no kind of talk of micro businesses, of startups, of the self-employed in general. And I think this kind of comes back to something that was discussed earlier by the kind of MIT professor, and the kind of really great work he seems to be doing with Intuit as well there, is around business dynamism. And I think this is a big debate in the US, getting less of it in the UK, but hopefully it's kind of ramping up, which is that you also need lots of new businesses, you need young businesses, and you need that kind of that vibrancy. And I see Emma in the audience, Emma Jones from Enterprise Nation, thinking back to a time when we had in the UK something called Startup Britain. I remember being in this sort of auditorium full of kind of young entrepreneurs wanting to start businesses. That kind of vibe of entrepreneurship has kind of tailed off. And I think that it's good to focus on high-tech businesses, high-growth businesses. That's what we care about. But I do worry that they're missing out on the wider ecosystem, and that bottleneck is too narrow, and we're not going to kind of get that real kind of momentum and feel and drive, and we're going to miss out on a lot of great entrepreneurs that don't fit into the kind of AI and the science-based kind of categories.
So from a moment where there's focus on business but not necessarily small business, to two people who focus exclusively on small business in the U.S. economy, Sean and Meredith, as staff directors for the Senate Small Business Committee, you're at the nexus of policy and entrepreneurship every day. You just heard about research and development, building up specific industries, and of course, expensing and tax provisions. How do those kind of priorities resonate with your bosses, Chair Ben Cardin, Ranking Member Joni Ernst? Sean, maybe start with you and then go to Meredith.
Yeah, so I work for Chairman Ben Cardin, and our committee has oversight over the Small Business Administration. And my boss's goal is to make sure that agency is providing the resources and tools necessary to meet the challenges of today. And a lot of those challenges you've heard on previous panels. So the first thing is access to capital. The SBA's main lending programs do a lot better job reaching underserved businesses. They do a better job than traditional banks, but they don't do as good a job as they should. And they're particularly not doing a good job on black-owned businesses in particular. And so under the Obama administration, you had a program called Community Advantage that, the data shows is doing a much better job. We want to make that program permanent so that people, mission lenders have the certainty that program is going to be around in the future. Second thing we want to work on is contracting. The number of federal contracting dollars has gone up, which is great, but the overall number of small business contractors have gone down. We need to do a much better job of making sure that small businesses have access to the biggest customer, which is the federal government. And third, we have a bunch of entrepreneurial development programs that aren't in the communities where they necessarily should be, and that means rural, that means historically black colleges and universities, minority-serving institutions. We want to do a better job of reaching those areas as well. And in the last Congress, my boss wrote the legislation that codified the Minority Business Development Agency. And so that was a great success, and you're going to hear from the first undersecretary a little bit later. We're excited about that. But we want to do that same sort of modernization for the SBA in this Congress.
Yeah, Meredith, what are some of the Senator Ranking Member Ertz's priorities?
Thank you, John. So the Republican ranking member of the Small Business Committee is from the state of Iowa, which for those of you in the UK, Iowa is a state right in the middle of the country. It's known for pork and corn, but also a thriving financial services industry. My boss shares many of the goals that Sean described from our chairman, particularly on access to capital and contracting opportunities for women entrepreneurs. There's a lot more that we need to do. It is absolutely true that the SBA does a better job than banks alone at providing capital to small businesses, but particularly in investment capital, there's a lot more that we need to do. I would also mention on the contracting side that our goals in the United States to funnel contracting dollars to women and underserved communities are very low, and we're not even reaching those bars right now. So there's a lot of work to do there. Major problems, as Sean mentioned, about a shrinking contracting base, which has significant implications for our national security and supply chain resiliency. We're also laser focused on inflation. It is by far the biggest challenge facing small businesses in every sector in the United States, and I understand from my my counterparts in the UK that you guys are experiencing similar concerns, particularly in food and energy prices, and how that is impacting growth and sustainability of these businesses. And then I also have to mention a major concern of my boss that came up earlier in terms of the care policy issue, particularly around childcare, and the challenges that childcare deserts, as we call them, in many areas of the United States are really impeding the ability of small businesses to start and grow, and obviously also impacts workforce issues and the ability to hire and retain employees. So that is a very high priority that has become even more clear in the post-COVID world.
Well, I think childcare, inflation, some themes that don't seem to know there's an ocean between them. Another theme is maybe overstated at times, partisanship. I picked up the Daily Mirror and the Sun yesterday, and it's the same partisanship that we see in our media in the US, and yet here we have a Democratic staff member, a Republican staff member from two seemingly different states, but you found ways to work together on the committee. Your bosses have, your teams have. What are some of the successes in recent years that you've been able to get done that show that there's real actual bipartisanship on the committee?
So we were the, you've heard a lot about the PPP program, Paycheck Protection Program. That came out of our committee in March 2020. We were, what happened was that all the committees were tasked to work on their own specific pieces of the COVID response, and ours was the small business response. And the reason why we're the first title in that bill is because we were able to come together and come up with a compromise sooner than anybody else, which was great. And the shared goal between the Republican and Democratic members of the committee was to get the money out fast, because we knew that if we went through a 6-month rulemaking, if we wrote a lot of complicated rules, the money wouldn't get out for several months and businesses would just fail. We wanted to make sure that the money got out there, and it did get out there. As a matter of fact, the program shut down after 13 days because it ran out of money. We had to replenish it. But what we did after that was we set up, we made tweaks. And what we did is that we had set-asides for minority depository institutions. We had set-asides for CDFIs to try to make the program more equitable. But we really didn't have a choice but to use the backbone of the 7A system to get the money out, because the SBA is simply too small an agency to do it themselves, at least at that time.
Yeah, I would certainly echo Sean's comments across the board there. Despite all of the criticisms of PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program that you've heard today, there was a collective bipartisan agreement that keeping people connected to their employment through this crisis was both in our economic interest, so that we could recover quickly, and in society's best interest, because of a breakdown that was feared if people were disconnected from their jobs and didn't have jobs to go back to. And so it is an area, Sean and I could probably sit here and come up with plenty of areas to debate and to arm wrestle over.
Let's
but,
do it.
But the COVID response was something that made me very proud as an American and as a staffer for the legislative branch of our government to be involved in coming up with a solution that saved so many jobs and so many businesses. And as Sean said, as the days wore on and it became clear that this was not a short-term crisis and that COVID was not going away when summer arrived, we tweaked the program. We addressed the gaps. I think we're very targeted and prescriptive in how those dollars should reach the businesses most in need and those that have been left out. And we did that in a bipartisan way. I'll also highlight another recent success that we've had. We all know that small businesses are the innovators in all of our economies. They come up with the ideas and they have the drive and the ability to break through incumbent challenges that incumbents have to think outside the box and take risks. And so in the United States, we have a program called the Small Business Innovation Research Program that sets aside a percentage of research and development dollars by federal agencies, invest that money, it's an investment program, into innovative companies that come up for solutions for the warfighter and for all sorts of problems that we're facing, from healthcare to energy to certainly national security, and gives small businesses a role in leading on solutions there. And we came together in a bill that really strengthened the program and helps us combat malign influence from our adversaries, primarily China and Russia, and ensuring that those investment dollars are focused on United States businesses and those of our friends across the pond and elsewhere in the world, so that we're able to achieve the objectives that our innovative companies, all the problems they help us solve.
Yeah, I think those are some concrete examples of, despite what you read, people are finding ways to work across the aisle. I want to kind of close out with a more open-ended question, and maybe Philip, beginning with you. US-UK policy, ways to work together. What are some of the ways, in your view, your organization's view, what are the next steps that need to happen so that small businesses can know that they have the right policies in place to support them?
More conferences like this would be great. I really think that you learn so much that you didn't know going into it. It's the kind of unknown category of when you meet people from across the pond. Think in terms of from the business perspective, like if you're a small business owner, it can be quite daunting to think about policy in the whole, and it's quite you've got to get on with running your business and really like what influence can you have. I think there are real kind of touch points that are really useful, and I think in the UK instance, got things like the FSB, who I know, kind of part of the conference today. They have people who represent their own trade and really kind of get stuck in to kind of engaging with trade policy. Obviously, that's not for everyone, so you can kind of input, on a lower level. Enterprise Nation, they have kind of local leaders, and they engage as well internationally and are kind of expanding internationally. I was just talking to someone from Codec who represent kind of tech startups. They've been kind of really vocal on Silicon Valley Bank fallout, which is something that unites us across the pond. And they got their kind of the entrepreneurs in their network out on the media talking about, we need the government to act quickly, and thankfully they did. So I think I think in the UK case, actually, for business owners, you can really engage with think tanks, which is kind of what I'm involved with, or business groups. They really are an open door, but I guess you just want to be strategic about your time and just make sure you focus on the issues that are kind of most important to you, most pertinent to you, whatever that is, whether that's kind of diversity, whether that's trade, whatever it is. And I do think then we can kind of build those relations across the pond and really get things done and kind of raise all these issues up to the very highest level that you guys are working on.
Well, and I think, sometimes we encourage everyone to be advocates. And sometimes I hear from small business owners, well, I don't see the fruits of the labor sometimes. But on the issue of trade and export in the United States, something, Meredith, I know you've worked a lot on, there are real fruits of the labor for businesses saying, we want help entering this marketplace. And so Meredith, I wonder if you might talk about the STEP program as something that's been a part of your portfolio over the years.
Sure, I'm happy to. The program John's referring to is the State Trade Expansion Program. Following the financial crisis and the recession in the United States, states in particular started to pull back on their investments in export. And it really became clear that this was something that SBA needed to take a bigger role in. We know that jobs connected to exports pay better, they're more stable. They obviously, diversification of a company. And so that became a major tenet of a policy initiative that we had at the time. That program has grown. The United States has a lot to learn from the UK and our European friends. We're a large country, and the result of that in many ways is that small businesses have not had to look outside of our own borders and our own market for customers. And that's not something that is a natural tendency to many small businesses, but the opportunities are vast. And in an increasingly global economy, it's really vital that we do a better job of that for small businesses. So the STEP program helps small businesses identify opportunities outside of the United States, the kind of the nuts and bolts of exporting, particularly for new to export firms who may not have decided whether or not it makes sense to take the risk to go into a new market. This program helps with participation in trade shows and identifying customers abroad. The gold key services that our government colleagues with the commercial service were speaking of earlier, which I agree is one of the most well-kept secrets, unfortunately, in the federal government. And we've really made strides in getting more small businesses to export in the United States. We're slowly growing that number of firms, but we have a very long way to go. And look forward to working with Chairman Cardin and our colleagues in the administration to do that.
Perfect place to end, a case study of there was a problem, policy came in and has enabled the expansion of the marketplace globally. I think that's the perfect takeaway of when there are big problems, policy actually can buttress the business environment. So please join me in thanking an incredible panel that's at the center of policy.
We are pleased to hear from two distinguished keynote speakers this morning, offering their binational perspectives on fueling the world's entrepreneurs. Here to introduce our first keynote speaker, please welcome back Chief of External Affairs at Federation of Small Businesses, Craig Beaumont.
Thank you very much. For me, small business is about good people doing good things. And I think bringing entrepreneurial flair into what they do. And that's true in politics too. So, for example, our organizer today, Leroy, was described to me by the leader of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce as their answer to Olivia Pope. And if you're a fan of Scandal, you know that's a very high compliment. He gets things done. But that's also true in UK politics, and you're about to hear now from one of the good guys. Kevin Hoddingrake has been a government minister for about 20 weeks, so he's still fairly fresh. But last month, in the machinery of government changes we discussed earlier, he is now in the Department for Business and Trade, this new shiny mega department bringing together domestic and international business interests. Very helpful, I think, for today as well. And while ministerial responsibilities have still not been announced, he was the Small Business, Enterprise and Markets Minister, and we would expect that to continue in the new department. But with trade suddenly added on to that area of responsibility. He's highly focused on late payments domestically, so he may speak about that. And that's really important for small businesses, whether they trade internationally or not. Getting paid on time and to the full amount, not paying extra in order to be paid quicker, is actually a major issue domestically and in the US too. Having poured through the budget documents yesterday, there is also a commitment in there, interestingly for you, on a commitment to streamline customs declarations for small businesses. Now, there's no detail about that, but it's thinking about the single trade window. And I'm sure he may talk about trade in general, but that's one area we'll be looking at in the next few weeks. So, you know, this minister is a former small business owner himself. His dad ran a milk round, so delivering milk to local community. And Kevin then set up a successful estate agent's business, which then expanded and grew and became actually a large business. So he's a friend of the Federation of Small Businesses, he's a friend of the small business movement, and delighted to welcome to the stage Kevin Hoddingrake, Small Business Minister.
Good morning. Well, thank you really for inviting me here to speak today. It is a great pleasure to be here as the Minister for Enterprise, Markets and Small Business, particularly in that I was in business for 30 years myself before entering politics. So it's, I say, a further delight to be able to perform this role and support the needs of SMEs. The key thing for the key engine room for our growth in our economy, the key element of growth, and our department is the Department for Business and Trade, recently reformed to link the interests of business with the interests of those who want to export and trade internationally. But we really call it the Department for Growth. It's such an important part of the economy. SMEs drive all our economy forward. And somebody, I say, I was in business for 30 years, every time we needed to become more productive and up our game, it's because of new competition entering our marketplaces. So it shows how important SMEs are. And there's two really things that are important to SMEs, in my view. It's a fair and level playing field, so they can trade domestically and internationally on a fair basis. And then it is stability. It's really, you want to know what's ahead, and you're able then to plan ahead. And I think it's fair to say in the UK, we haven't seen too much political stability over the last 12 months, but hopefully we're on to cut into calmer waters now. We've got the right person as our Prime Minister in Rishi Sunak and the right person as Chancellor in terms of Jeremy Hunt. And of course, a big announcement yesterday, our budget day yesterday, and I thought some very positive things for business, particularly in terms of rewarding capital investment, which again, investment in our economy is the most important thing to drive the economy forward. And that's good for SMEs, of course, and the SMEs already had the comfort of the annual investment allowance, which allows SMEs to invest full expensing for investment in the first 12 months, and we're expanding that effectively now to larger companies as well, which also is good for SMEs because, you know, lots of large businesses trade with smaller businesses too in their supply chain. So good right across the board in terms of rewarding investment. So, as I say, my ministerial portfolio covers small business and enterprise right across the piece, and I'm proud to see so many small business leaders, entrepreneurs and experts from around the world here today to explore policy issues impacting industry trends, economic development and the future of small business, and discuss how we can uncover untapped trading potential and opportunities between the US and the UK. The UK and the US are each other's closest allies. We have a phenomenal trade relationship worth £262 billion annually, and in total over £1.1 trillion invested in each other's economies. More than 1 million Brits now working for US firms, and more than 1 million Americans working for British companies. There are huge opportunities to build on this relationship together and ensure we are working together to address the challenges of the modern economy. It is a government priority to make it easier, quicker and cost-effective for businesses, particularly smaller companies that are the engine rooms of our economy, to work together across the Atlantic, and for consumers on both sides of the pond to have greater access to a greater variety and range of quality products and services. The US is the UK's largest export market and offers a wealth of opportunity to UK companies of all sizes across all sectors. My department, the Department of Business and Trade, works directly with SMEs across the UK and beyond to help UK businesses capitalise on the enormous global demand for British goods and services. We have a number of services within the department to facilitate support to UK businesses, including the Export Support Service International Markets Programme, which has already guided around 1,000 companies into the North American market. We are determined to make it easier for UK SMEs to import and export to the European Union and the US, our biggest markets. The UK-US trade dialogues in Baltimore and Aberdeen brought together a wide range of UK and US stakeholders to support for SMEs. Support for SMEs was one of the key areas where the UK and the US agreed to further strengthen cooperation. In the past 12 months, we have held 2 UK-US SME dialogues, the most recent of which was in Edinburgh at the end of last year, bringing over 50 UK and US SMEs and business organisations together to identify ways to support smaller companies from both sides of the Atlantic. At the event, we discussed the importance of digital trade and reducing the paperwork associated with exports and customs processes, how we can help make the trading journey simpler. We also looked at the specific challenges faced by women-owned SMEs. The UK and US governments agreed to improve information and support for SMEs looking to trade in the UK and US, including by updating toolkits for SME exporters. In parallel to our federal trade engagement, we are also strengthening trade ties with individual states, including through Memoranda of Understanding, MOUs, on trade and economic cooperation. We signed MOUs with Indiana, North Carolina and South Carolina in 2022 and are actively engaging with further states, including Oklahoma, Utah, Texas and California. Of course, signing these agreements is just the start just the start. The mark of their success will be what they can deliver for you in business by unlocking barriers, attracting investment and ultimately growing trade. Our work with states following signature is already underway. In November last year, we arranged for a delegation of UK offshore wind leaders to meet the governor and local businesses in North Carolina, sharing best practice and exploring supply chain opportunities. In December, we held our first bilateral working group with Indiana, focused on opportunities in energy transition, sustainability and government procurement. And just weeks ago, we hosted a delegation of economic development leaders from across Indiana here in the UK, progressing our cooperation on clean energy. In the past few weeks, we have also held the North American Roadshow, visiting 12 cities across the United Kingdom, promoting opportunities and services available to UK businesses as they develop their export journey to the US. These events showcase our department's ambition to support businesses embarking on transatlantic growth and to boost exports, with exporters proven to create jobs, increase wages and boost productivity, all key in helping to grow the economy. SMEs are the backbone of the US-UK trading relationship, and events like this are a brilliant opportunity to discuss how we can further support UK and US SMEs to seize the opportunities offered by the UK-US trading relationship. Thank you.
Now to introduce the U.S. keynote speaker, please welcome back Co-Executive Director for Small Business Roundtable, Rhett Buttle.
Hello, well, thank you all so much for being with us today as we wrap up an amazing day of programming. As we wrap things up, I couldn't be more privileged to stand here to introduce our next keynote speaker. Two words and titles sort of come to mind. You could give this man so many titles. Two for me that are really important. One is friend, and the second is fighter. The reason I say friend is because our final keynote speaker has been a long friend and comes from the small business community. And now, given where he is continued to be a powerful force for making sure that we have a voice. The second is fighter. Started his career working in the state legislature, has battled the halls of the US Senate, which if you've ever been to the US Senate, you know how tenacious that is. And we are so thrilled to be able to have him now as our very first Undersecretary of the Minority Business Development Agency. As many of you know, our president, President Biden, passed an infrastructure law. As part of that infrastructure law, there was a large infusion of both funding that went to the Department of Commerce to help implement the infrastructure law. But one of the largest priorities has been placed on the important growth of small business entrepreneurs, particularly those that come from communities of color. And so this new elevated position, the very first Undersecretary of the Minority Business Development Agency, is a key role in helping the Biden administration implement their economic agenda. So with no further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our very first Undersecretary for the MBDA, Don Cravens.
Good afternoon, and good morning to my folks back at home, to my family who hopefully is watching. I've been a little confused. I've been walking in places here in London saying, good morning, and people are like, dude, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but it is so good to be here. First of all, let me just thank Rhett for that warm introduction, and I want to thank the Undersecretary, Hollenrake, for his warm hospitality, as well as our friends and colleagues at our U.S. Embassy who have welcomed us as well. I want to thank them for their hospitality as well. On behalf of the Minority Business Development Agency, the Department of Commerce, and the Biden administration, I bring greetings to you and want to thank the Small Business Roundtable, Rhett, John, Elliot, Leroy, all of the folks who've made this event so possible. Can we give them another round of applause? I'm also grateful that I didn't make this journey across the Atlantic alone. I've got some wonderful colleagues from the Biden administration who joined us as well, and you've heard from many of them today, Michael and Tammy and others, and also so happy to see friends of mine who work in Congress, Sean and Meredith, friends of ours from both sides of the aisle. It's good to be able to say that we have a wonderful working relationship with them and their bosses as well. And then just thanks to all of our American friends and colleagues who made the journey as well, our chambers of commerce, our businesses, our universities, our trade associations. Just thank you so much for joining us as we come to talk to our friends and family here in the UK about the importance of working together and building more connective tissue. You know, the American people, from the Oval Office to the city councils, to the town councils, from the big boardrooms to the small business back rooms, they understand that in order for us to succeed, we are going to have to work better and more closely together as we increase this global economy. Because we know that a global economy brings opportunity. Opportunity for our nations to reach their full potential. Strengthening and diversifying the commercial relationships between our nation's businesses will create more stability and more prosperity. Now, obviously, the US and the UK, we work together. We've been working together for many, many decades. Our economies are already deeply connected in many ways through trade and supply chains. technology, and joint innovation. But what I will ask you as we close this summit to think about is, how can we do better? How can we do more? How do we ensure that our supply chains are more resilient in times of crisis like during the COVID pandemic? How do we advance technology as a global force for good? How do we achieve, as I mentioned earlier, our full economic potential as a global economy? Well, the professor said it earlier. It's about injecting new blood into the economies. New blood into the economies. We do so by creating environments that offer opportunities to every entrepreneur at every step of their business journey. We ensure that our economies grow not only exponentially, but also equitably, lifting up those at every rung of the entrepreneurship ladder. Now, doing that, ladies and gentlemen, will require intention. It will require leadership. And that is the role that I serve in at our new but old agency, the Minority Business Development Agency. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the MBDA, Rhett talked a little bit about it, but I'd like to just tell you a little bit about the Minority Business Development Agency. The United States has many great government resources. We've heard a lot today about the Small Business Administration, and it was so great to see my friend and our former administrator, Karen Mills. You've heard about our International Trade Administration as well. But the Minority Business Development Agency plays a very unique role in the resources that the government provides. We are the only federal agency that our sole mission, it's what I do each and every day, is that we focus on the growth and the global competitiveness of minority business enterprises. I like to think I have the best job description in the United States because it's what I get to do each and every day, unapologetically, at the Department of Commerce, at all levels of government, and as well with the private sector. It's our mission. It's what we do. We want to expand access to opportunities for businesses that are owned for people of color. Now, as Red said, it feels great to be the first ever Undersecretary of Minority Business, but I want to say I didn't start this role. I am coming on the shoulders, standing on the shoulders of men and women who have come before me, who fought for the day that our agency would be permanent. The MBDA was created in 1969 by then President Nixon. It was created at the end of the civil rights movement. It was when our leaders such as Dr. King were not only talking about social and civil rights, but was also talking about the need for economic rights and economic justice. And for 50 years, the MBDA existed as a temporary agency because it was not created by a law, it was created by the president through an executive order. So what that meant was the agency was temporary. Each president had to decide whether he would keep the agency around, and each Congress had to decide whether or not they would fund the agency. But despite that, we made a difference in America. Over the 50 years, we made an impactful and intentional difference. Just last year, we helped our clients secure $1 billion in capital, $1.7 billion in contracts. We accomplished this through our 88 business centers and equities grant programs that exist in 36 states in America, including territories of Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. There, we provide technical assistance programs to help entrepreneurs with the help they need to start, to grow, to scale up, business support services to help them continue to be successful. We want to live in a nation where minority doesn't always equal small. Minority cannot equal small. While we focus on minority businesses, though, I want you to understand that we depend on our allies who may not be minority, who may not look like me, to help in this mission as well, because we know that a strong minority business community means a stronger American community. We heard our friends here in the UK talk about that today. A stronger minority business community here in the UK, I dare say, means a stronger UK economy. That's how we make a difference at MBDA, and that is why we need our allies as well. So for 53 years, we did this as a temporary agency, but as Rhett said, in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, a group of senators and House members in the United States both Republican and Democrat, said it's time that the MBDA be a permanent agency. And so for the first time in over 50 years, the Minority Business Development Agency is a permanent agency. And what that means is we now have more resources, more of a voice to step up, stand up, and speak out on behalf of minority businesses in our country, as well as internationally. And that's why I'm happy to be here today. We have a permanent seat at the table at MBDA. So the point is this: we're not only the voice, but we are setting the menu now. We're not just at the table, we're setting the menu, and we're driving the conversation around minority business enterprises in our country. Now, we know the number one challenge. We've heard it all today. Michael talked about it. Karen Mills talked about it. We all talked about it. It's access to capital. It's access to contracts. It's access to global networks and markets. And so we focus very heavily on that at the Minority Business Development Agency. We've got 4 export centers that we run, one in Miami, Phoenix, Houston, and San Antonio. And our exporting centers are specifically designed to help us do the work that we talked about today. And so our centers get results. We facilitated over $500 million in export transactions last year, and there are thousands of minority firms that we've been able to help through our time. Now, what I want to leave you with is, just because MBDA is the voice for minority businesses in the federal government, we need allies. We need you all to be our partners. This is a collective mission. When it comes to financing, and you heard Karen Mills talk about this, we need our banking partners to step up. And I'm sure it's the same here in the United Kingdom. We do a great job at the MBDA and at the SBA, I think, of training entrepreneurs. But ladies and gentlemen, we cannot have a world, a country, or countries of overtrained, unfunded entrepreneurs. And so we need our private sector, we need our banking community, we need our finance community to help meet the gap of training and resources and being prepared, but entrepreneurs need access upon the training. We also need our big businesses to step up. And I talked to our ambassadors, to the embassy folks about this yesterday. We need more of our big businesses to embrace supplier diversity, not just because it's the right thing to do, because it's the smart thing to do. It's the best business practices. We know that those who understand the value that minority businesses bring, they make more money. They're better run companies. They're more successful. The studies show it. You heard about it today. That is what our mission is. So ladies and gentlemen, the one thing that I always tell our businesses back at home is to hold us accountable, hold the MBDA accountable, hold the Department of Commerce accountable, hold the government accountable, so that we live up to the mission that we've continued to promise. Now that MBDA has these resources to reach across the United States, we have to hold us accountable, make us help you to do that. To those of you from the UK, I would offer the same advice. Hold the undersecretary who spoke before me accountable. Hold your governments accountable. Our world depends on it. Our nations depend on it. And so in closing, I want to say that in order to expand opportunities for the world's entrepreneurs, we will have to work together. If we ensure the intention is there, I know we will succeed. Because what is clear is the opportunity is here. So if you take the opportunity and you add that intention, I think we will be successful. I promise you MBDA will do its part. And I'm more than hopeful than now that we've got some friends from the outside, across the pond, here in the UK, who are going to work with us to help us be successful. We will do the same for you. Consider us an ally and a resource for you as well. That is how we're going to make our global economy work for every business. That's how we will give every entrepreneur, every one of our nations, both of our nations, a real shot at achieving our true potential. And so again, I want to thank you for this opportunity today to be with you all. I hope that this is the beginning of a relationship with the Minority Business Development Agency, and that we can really do some great things for people on both sides of the Atlantic and make some systemic, real lasting change in our communities. Thank you, and God bless you.
Offering his closing remarks on this morning's program, please offer a warm round of applause to the Co-Executive Director for Small Business Roundtable, John Stanford.
I told myself I would never follow Don Craven speaking. Such a letdown to come down from his worthy remarks. So, but here I am, and I am the last speaker. So I'm just here to say thank you. Thank you to the incredible group of people who've made today happen. This is a dream come true for Rhett, myself, the Small Business Roundtable team. 5 years ago, I'm not sure we could have envisioned the kind of day and trip we're having here, the kinds of partners we've had. They gave me a very long list of partners, and I think that's a testament to what this event represented. We have several agencies of the US government here in the Biden administration. We have folks from Congress. We have folks from the British government. I would be remiss not to mention FSB, Enterprise Nation, the Entrepreneurs Network, without whom none of this would be possible on their home turf. To the SBR team, this feels like an Oscar speech, to be quite honest. To the Small Business Roundtable, Katie, Leroy, Lisa, our voice of God. Can we have a round of applause for Lisa, our voice of God, all day? Elliot, Richard, and Ashlyn, this would not be possible. The incredible team at One Birdcage Walk. What an amazing venue. We will be back. Could take us 5 years to get Don to come back, or maybe we do this every year. Should we commit right now? Every year we come to London? Finally, our incredible partners, Intuit and Gusto, that help make all of this possible. So with that, my final thank you is to all of you in the audience, both here and online. All of you, just by being here, are small business advocates, and without you, none of this is possible. Thanks for coming, and thanks for making EX23 a success.